I hunt central Illinois on permission ground, a neighbor's place that's about 120 acres of cut beans, a hedgerow, and a creek bottom strip of timber. I'm 34. I've been at it since I was a kid. I'm not a trophy guy. If a decent buck or a big doe gives me a clean shot, that's meat for the freezer. I keep it legal and simple. Field edges, wind in my face. Don't overthink it. This was second firearm season, early December. Cold enough that the bean stubble had a white crust on it. I parked at the gate before dawn, walked the two-track with my headlamp pointed at my boots, and tucked into a little natural blind I made at the hedgerow. Just a stool behind some blowdowns where I'd trimmed a shooting lane. No bait, no gimmicks. It's Illinois. You watch the food and hope they step out. Everything felt normal for the first hour. Frost, distant traffic on the county blacktop, a couple geese going over so low you could hear their wings. At first light, I had 2 does cut across the far corner. They were edgy, but that's December. They disappeared into the low draw by the creek, and I settled back in. Then the field went dead. I don't mean quiet like deer aren't moving. I mean quiet like the air got thick. No sparrows in the hedgerow, no crows, even the geese farther off shut up. I told myself it was just the wind shifting, or I was just noticing the cold. I caught the first motion at the break where the field falls into the creek bottom. At a glance I thought, coyote. It was low and moving like it was scenting the ground. But a coyote doesn't carry that kind of bulk through bean stubble without you seeing the top of it the whole time. This dipped, then rose up at a height that was too high. I brought up the rifle slow just to use the glass. Scope was on the lowest power. I wanted an ID, not a shot. Through the scope I could see the back of it, dark and matted looking, shoulders rolling under the hide. It wasn't on all fours, it was kind of crouched, almost like a man squatting to look at something. Then it shifted its body and stood straighter. That was the biggest, oh my God moment of my life. Arms, not forelegs. Arms hanging, long arms. And it had hands that appeared to be similar to human. I don't have a better word. They were just hanging loose at the ends. It turned a little and I got the profile of its head. Long snout. Ears up and forward like a dog. I dropped the rifle for a second because my hands were slick with sweat. I told myself, hard, don't move, don't run, don't do anything dumb. I eased the stock back into my shoulder and stayed with it. It moved another few yards and stopped at a dark patch it hadn't paid attention to. When my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a gut pile. Somebody had shot a deer on the next parcel and dumped the insides right at the edge a day or 2 earlier. I'd walked past it in the dark and never even noticed. It crouched over that pile and sniffed. It wasn't acting weird or anything, not super intelligent, just animalistic. It picked at it with those hands, the hand-looking paws, more like it was picking through, deciding what it was going to eat and what it wasn't. Steam came off. In the cold, I could see its breath roll out of that snout. At some point, it knew I was there. No sound gave me away, but it turned its head quickly and looked straight into the hedgerow where I was tucked in. Through the scope, I saw the eyes. They weren't super bright, but they were this dull, greenish white reflection. It wasn't scared. It wasn't surprised. It just knew. We held that for maybe 3 seconds, and 3 seconds felt like a full minute. I slid to safety with my thumb, without thinking. Then I put it back. I wasn't going to shoot. I didn't know what I was looking at, and I wasn't putting a round into something that might charge 20 yards of open beans and beyond me before I could rack another round. Also, and this is the honest part, I didn't want to see what a hit would do. I wanted it to leave. A truck rattled somewhere out on the blacktop. That was enough. It stood up smoothly, and when it did, there was no hunch or wobble like a bear trying to balance. It was balanced already, tall and straight, shoulders wider than any man I've ever seen. It stepped off the gut pile and walked along the fence line parallel to me, maybe 40 yards out. It had that long, ground-eating stride you see in people with long legs, except every step was silent and bean stubble that crunches under everything else. When it reached the old woven wire fence, it didn't climb. It put a hand on a post like a human steadying themselves and just stepped over the top strand like it was nothing. Then it slid down into the draw and was gone into the timber. I sat there until the sun got high enough to feel it on my jacket. I couldn't feel my fingers. I unloaded, racked the chamber clear, and stayed seated another 10 minutes just listening for anything that sounded like it had changed its mind. Nothing. When I finally stood, my knees were wobbly. I went to the fence line because I had to. At the gut pile, the snow crust was all scuffed up and the beans were pressed down where it was kneeling. I didn't take pictures. I didn't measure anything. I just looked at it. My brain melted, and I walked away. The landowner asked at lunch if I'd seen anything. I said a couple does and passed. He brought up coyotes hitting gut piles, and I nodded like that explained the whole morning. I still hunt that farm, but I don't sit in that hedgerow in the dark anymore. I wait for proper daylight. I don't walk that 2-track with the light off. I keep my head up when the field goes dead quiet. I don't glass gut piles. If I see one, I give it distance and let the scavengers have their way. Whatever I saw that day wasn't a coyote, and it wasn't somebody out there in a suit. I don't want to hear that garbage. I'm not an idiot. It used the field edge like I would. It watched the wind like I would. It looked right at me and didn't care that I had a rifle across my knees pointed directly at it. People ask me a lot when I tell this, why I didn't pull the trigger. Because I wanted to go home. Because I wanted to see my wife and kids. Because I didn't know what happens when you make something like that mad, and I don't want to find out. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do in a field full of stubble is keep your safety on, and just let the morning pass. I hope this helps. K.M., Illinois. This was 2009, muzzleloader season in the Ozarks. I was in my late 20s then, hunting public land with my uncle. We didn't hunt together, shoulder to shoulder. We just parked at the same pull-off and went our separate ways, planning to meet back at the truck before dark. About an hour before legal light ended, I had a decent-sized buck step out about 60 yards from me. I took the shot and knew I'd hit it. I heard that all familiar smack. I watched the tail, the flag drop. I knew it was a hit. The deer mule kicked and just tore off into the brush. I waited about 15 minutes, like any hunter is supposed to, then climbed down and started looking for blood trails. At first, it was textbook. Red splatter on the leaves, a few good drops on the rocks. Easy blood trail to follow. I marked it with a bit of orange flagging tape as I went. The sign carried downhill toward the dry creek bed. I figured the deer would bed up somewhere close. They usually head for water when they're wounded. But when I got to the creek bottom, things changed. The drops turned into streaks, long smears like something dragged the deer instead of it running on its own. I crouched down to study one of the marks and realized it wasn't just a smear. It was like grooves, deep lines cut into the mud, as if something with claws had dug in while pulling. Now listen, I've tracked a lot of deer in my life. I've seen coyotes get a hold of a wounded one or bobcats picking at a carcass. This wasn't anything like that. The ground told a different story. It looked like whatever had the deer was upright, hauling it along like a man would drag a heavy sack. The stride length was ridiculous. 6, maybe 7 feet between each set of gouges. The hair on my arms went up. It was dead quiet, too. Not even a squirrel barking. And those little annoying things are always making sounds when you're hunting. I pushed on another 30 yards or so until I hit a little clearing where the moonlight cut through. It was almost dark by that point. That's where it was. I found my deer. The deer was there, or what was left of it. The hindquarters were torn open. Steam was rising from the carcass as it was still warm. I crouched over it was something I still cannot believe to this day that I saw. It looked like a wolf, but it wasn't on all fours. It was squatting, hunkered over the carcass with its back to me. The shoulders were absolutely huge, muscles moving under this thick, dark fur as it pulled at the deer. I could hear bones snapping and these wet, tearing sounds that I hear in my nightmares. I must have stepped on a twig or something because it froze. Slowly, it turned its head sideways just enough for me to see the profile of its face. Long snout, pointed devil ears, and one amber eye reflecting back at me. I couldn't move. I didn't breathe. It just stood still, hunched forward, and for a split second I thought it was going to turn all the way toward me. Instead, it lifted what was left of that deer like it was nothing, slung it over its shoulder, and walked off into the woods. Upright, the entire time. I couldn't make my legs move until the sound of it faded completely. When I finally backed out, I didn't follow my flagging tape. I just angled uphill until I hit the road and walked the shoulder all the way back to the truck. My uncle was already there. He asked if I found my deer. He'd heard me shoot. I said no, lost the blood. He nodded and didn't press. I wasn't about to tell him what I saw. He volunteered and suggested we come back in the morning and try to pick it up. I told him not to worry about it, that I'd made a bad shot, and it was probably no use. For years, I've convinced myself that I didn't see what I saw. It was the low light conditions. It was not real. I was seeing things. But I know how far I tracked. I know what drag marks look like. And I know that no man can throw a buck carcass over his shoulder and just disappear in the woods without making a sound. I haven't muzzleloader hunted since that. I stick to rifle now. I don't like the thoughts of being out there with only one shot. Although I don't really know if the rifle would help, but it's better than nothing. I keep to spots where I can see a long ways off. I don't go crawling into creek bottoms alone. Name withheld. Arkansas. Reels. This unfortunate life-changing event took place in late December of 2017 in northern Louisiana. I was hunting ducks with a buddy from work. He had permission on some family land that backed into a swampy stretch off the Washita River. It wasn't some polished lease, just a half-rotten blind made from cane and old boards tucked into the bank. We launched before dawn, paddled maybe half a mile, and set up with a half-dozen decoys. It was a hunt where you're more likely to get cold and wet than limit out, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? The morning started out as expected. A couple teal buzzed past before shooting light. Then the sky just sort of went gray and still. Not much flying. We were sitting there whispering about packing up early when we heard something make this big splash. At first I thought it was a nutria or a beaver. Happens all the time in that kind of water. But it wasn't just one splash. It was steady, and it sounded like something walking through the water 2 feet. It was heading toward us through waist-deep water. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear something walking through waist-deep water, in my mind that raises a whole lot of concern and even more questions. What out there is big enough, tall enough, that it can step through waist-deep water? Not to mention no one else was supposed to be back there. No other hunters had boats at the launch when we shoved off. My buddy asked, "Do you hear that?" Of course I heard it. It was loud as hell. The splashing stopped about 30 or 40 yards out, right past our decoys. That's when a sound came out of the cypress that I will try to explain, but I don't think words can tell you what we heard. It was a low sound, a guttural sound. It was sort of a growl and sort of a rumble mixed together. It was deep enough that I felt it in my entire body vibrating. This wasn't a hog. No, it wasn't a gator. It wasn't anything I've ever heard before or since. We raised our shotguns, but didn't fire. It was too dark to make out much shape. There was just a shadow standing half in the water, half hidden behind a tree. But as the clouds shifted, a little bit of light hit. I could see the outline pretty clear. It had very wide, broad shoulders, long, skinny arms, and it had a head with a snout. It was tall enough that its chest was way above the waterline. And we were in a swamp where a man would have been waist deep. It didn't rush us. It didn't flinch at the movement of our guns. The thing just stood there, staring at us, letting out that slow, chest-deep growl like it was reminding us where we were. My buddy whispered to me, "One of us needs to shoot a warning shot." So I raised the barrel high and touched off one into the sky. The shot echoed, birds scattered, and for a second the swamp sounded alive again. When the ringing in my ears settled, the thing was gone. We heard no splashes. We did not hear it retreat. It was just gone. We sat there about 10 minutes, and finally he said, "Let's pull the decoys." We packed up in silence and paddled back to the truck. On the drive out, I finally asked him what he thought it was. I watched him grip the steering wheel so tight that his knuckles went white. He just said, "Don't ask me that again." That was all he ever said, and he wouldn't talk about it anymore. I've hunted ducks my whole life. I've seen every animal that swamp has to offer. I even ran across a black bear once in Arkansas. This wasn't any animal that I have ever seen or can describe. Whatever it was stood on 2 legs, chest completely out of the water. with a head like a wolf. Now, it didn't stop me from hunting. I still hunt ducks. It's something I love to do. But I never hunt anywhere near or on that swamp again. If anyone tells me they hear splashing in the pre-dawn, I don't laugh anymore. I pack up. Name withheld. Louisiana. Hey, friend. I was 17 hunting with my dad in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan back in 1995. He wasn't much for blinds or stands. He grew up old school, still hunting, slow walking, sitting against a tree for an hour, then moving again. That's how he taught me to hunt. It was late rifle season, snow on the ground but not deep, maybe 6 inches. We split up along a ridge where deer trails cut down into a cedar swamp. He told me to sit tight against a big pine and wait until noon, then circle back toward the truck. At first it was all peaceful out there. I had squirrels dropping pine cones all around me, chickadees bouncing through branches, all the little noises that kept you company in the woods. I even saw a doe and fawn cut through, about 50 yards away from me. No shot, but it kept me alert. Then, everything just went dead. And I don't mean slowly tapering, I mean completely dead. Like someone hit a switch. There was not a breath of wind, no birds at all, there was nothing moving. Even the air felt different, almost heavy, like it was pressing on the sides of my head and muffling my ears. After a few minutes of this silence, I started hearing crunching. It was very low and sounded far off at first. Then it started becoming more clear, getting closer. It was snow being stepped on. And it wasn't the hop-hop of a deer. It wasn't the small skitter steps of a squirrel. This was slow, and it was heavy. I raised my rifle and pointed toward the sound. Between the cedars, I saw some movement. It was very dark, a very broad shape. It was taller than a human man. It came into view at an angle, and I realized it wasn't walking on 4 legs. This wasn't an animal. It was walking upright. The head on this thing was too pointed. I thought bear, only for a split second, until it turned enough for me to see an ear, like a German shepherd's. Its eyes caught what little gray light filtered through, and they looked almost human, but they were a bright amber color. My instinct should have been to fire, but something inside of me, my very soul, screamed, "Don't do it." It was like looking at something that you're not permitted to see, something off limits to humankind. This thing stopped at a very short distance just ahead of me and stood there. It stared at me for about 5 seconds, and I was shaking. It tilted its head almost in a curious manner. Then it let out this low, huffing, blowing type sound, almost like a big dog clearing its throat, and it just turned back into the swamp and took off. I didn't breathe again until I saw my dad coming up the ridge about an hour later. He knew something was wrong right away. I told him I'd seen something big, but not details. He studied my face for a while and said, best to leave it be. We didn't hunt out there again, ever, after that. We stuck to farmland edges and hardwood ridges where we could see farther away. Years later, after he passed, I finally told a cousin what I'd seen. To my surprise, he believed me. He said Dad had told him once about being followed out of the same swamp as a young man. He never gave many details, he just said, "The legends are true. There's something out there that doesn't like people. I think now he took me there on purpose, maybe to see if I'd feel it too. To this day, I wish I'd asked him outright what it was, or what he knew about it. But I will tell you this. Every time I hear someone say wolves don't walk on two legs, I just keep my mouth shut. I know what I saw, and I know my dad did too. And I know you know as well. R.H., Michigan. This next email, the subject line is, "It rushed our camp, Idaho." This was 2001, elk camp in central Idaho. There were 4 of us, me, my brother, and 2 friends we'd known since high school. We set up our camp about 4 miles from the trailhead. Just some wall tents, cots, a propane lantern, and a fire ring. It was just a setup you can break down in a couple short minutes if the weather turned and you needed to get out quickly. We'd been hearing rumors at the cafe in town all week. There were local hunters talking about the wolf man in the timber. Some laughed, some didn't. We were in the group of the people that laughed it off. We just said it was too much whiskey and long winters, a bunch of nonsense. Around the fire that night, we even joked about it. We were thinking that people make these stories up to keep hunters out of good hunting spots, to keep them for themselves. One of the guys stood up and howled like a wolf, had us all cracking up. Not one of us was scared. Not yet. I'd say it was around midnight when the moods changed. The fire had burned down pretty low, and we were just sitting there quietly, staring into the fire. Then from a ridge above us came a howl that shut us up. It wasn't coyote, I know that for sure. And it definitely wasn't wolf. It was deeper, a lot louder, like it carried through your chest instead of your ears. It echoed for what I would say would be miles. We all just looked at each other like, well, that's kind of strange. We still wasn't what I would call scared. Then came the sound of something crashing downhill through the timber like a bulldozer. It was moving really fast. Whatever it was did not care about us hearing it. It wasn't even trying to be quiet. I could hear limbs snapping like toothpicks. There were big rocks rolling. The ground was shaking. We all jumped up, grabbed our rifles, and pointed them into the dark. No one fired. We were waiting to see eyes, a shape, something, anything to shoot at. But all we got was the firelight reflecting off 2 eyes that looked way too far off the ground to be an elk. Amber glow, locked right on us. It circled around the camp one time, just outside of the light. We'd spin trying to keep up, but it moved faster than we could. It started emitting these low growls every so often. You could feel it in your boots, it was so deep. At one point, it rushed close enough and so fast that one of the tents actually collapsed from the blast of air and the thump of the footsteps. Gear went everywhere. One of the guys screamed, "Shoot it." But none of us pulled the trigger. Something about it just didn't feel right, like firing would just make things a lot worse. After maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like an hour, the noises suddenly just come to a stop. There was no more crashing, no more growls. Everything was quiet. We definitely did not sleep that night. We were afraid to move. We stood shoulder to shoulder by the fire, keeping it fed, rifles loaded, waiting for it to come back. At first light, we walked to the edge of camp. No prints, no scat, Nothing but a bunch of snapped branches and our gear scattered around. It's like it wanted us to know it had been there, but left no evidence behind. We broke camp quickly that morning. No discussion, no vote. We just packed and left. 4 grown men carrying rifles, leaving elk tags unfilled because none of us wanted to spend another night there. Now when people ask why we don't backcountry elk hunt or camp anymore, we just say we're getting too old to pack in that far. The truth is, we're not. And we're not scared of bears, wolves, or mountain lions. Those are normal animals we've dealt with our entire lives. We're scared of that thing that circled that fire in 2001. We're scared of the stories we heard from other hunters now. We never really can say for sure what it was, but with all the rumors running around with other hunters in the area, and the experiences we had, and those amber-colored eyes, I'm pretty sure we encountered a dogman that night. Name withheld. Idaho.
Reels. I've been sitting on this story for a number of years now. It was 2004. I was a volunteer firefighter in a rural part of southern Ohio. We didn't get a lot of action compared to the city guys. Maybe a house fire once in a blue moon. But mostly it was chimney fires, fender benders, or helping out with brush burns that got out of hand. It wasn't extremely exciting, but I loved it. It was something I believed in. Neighbors helping neighbors. That kind of thing. Something we need more of today. It was sometime around the end of November. I remember because the air was definitely getting colder, and when you stepped outside, you could definitely tell winter was on the way. My pager went off around 11 p.m., jolting me awake. The call was for a barn fire out past the edge of town. On this call, it was one you know before you even get there, that the structure is probably going to be a complete loss. By the time I put my boots on, grabbed my gear, and drove out, you could see the glow in the sky from miles away. That's how hot this barn was burning. When I pulled up with the truck, the whole family that owned the place was standing outside. All of them safe, but they were completely panicked, understandably. The farmer was red-faced and he was shaking. He kept shouting that he heard something big inside the barn right before it went up. His wife was trying to calm him down, saying all the animals were already out in the pasture. He wouldn't drop it, though. We started laying lines, setting up to protect the house, which was only about 50 feet away from the barn. I remember the heat being so intense, it felt like your skin was cooking even through the turnout gear. I was on nozzle, waiting for water, when I caught movement at the edge of the trees beyond the fire. A normal individual would think, that's another horse and it's been spooked by the flames. But it didn't move like any horse. This thing was froze in position and standing upright on 2 legs. I was also froze with the nozzle in my hands, watching as this figure stepped out just enough that I could make out a few small details. This creature was enormous, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were broad and it was covered in dark fur that caught the light of the fire and made it shine. Its head was shaped like a timber wolf. Its arms were extremely long and looked almost malnourished. They were way too long for any animal or man alike. It was standing there on 2 legs, just like it was spectating the whole event. It only stood there for a few seconds, but I don't know how to explain the look. The eyes locked onto me. I could feel a physical heaviness of this thing's gaze. It was like my body just wouldn't move, like I was pinned in place by something that I couldn't understand. It's like its very stare alone could lock you down. It turned in this weird motion that did not look natural and just walked off into the woods. I thought maybe I'd lost it from the heat and exhaustion, but when we finally got the fire under control, one of the older guys, a 20-year vet, mind you, came up beside me. He didn't say anything right off. He just stood there looking toward that same tree line. Finally, he said, "You saw that thing too, didn't you?" Another guy actually overheard, and he nodded without a word. 3 of us had seen it. But when the chief filed out the incident report later, the cause was listed as electrical, and there was no mention of anything unusual or strange. I asked him about it once in private. He shut me down hard, said if I wanted to stay in the department, I'd keep my mouth shut about what I thought I saw and things that are above my pay grade. Which was ridiculous in itself. I was a volunteer. He definitely seemed a bit flustered and was crossing his words and mumbling. I don't think this warning, or whatever you want to call it, came directly from him. I think word got out and it came from somewhere higher up. That's just an opinion, of course, my observation of the events. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. But all of this seemed to tie up too convenient. There's one thing for certain. Now looking back, I know for a fact that farmer was telling the truth. There was something in that barn before it went up. I just wonder if he ever saw it too. And a question that needs even more attention. Did that thing somehow, some way, have anything to do with how that fire started? Sadly, we'll probably never know the answer to that question. But if you're hearing this and you think I'm full of crap and these things aren't real, I don't know what else to tell you. Name withheld. This email was subject line, the EMT crash encounter. It was back in 2011 when I was working as an EMT in Pennsylvania. Our shifts were 12 hours, and a lot of what we did was routine transfers. Nursing home to hospital, hospital back to home. But every so often, a call would come in that was a little more exciting, a little different. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning when dispatch sent us out to check on a car accident on a county road that runs through nothing but a lot of thick woods and farms. A state trooper was already en route, but we were closer, so we went ahead and went. When we pulled up, the scene didn't make any sense. Immediately, the car was nose down in a shallow ditch. The hazard lights were still blinking. The windshield was busted, but the airbags hadn't deployed. The front end didn't look like it hit anything major. The driver, a man in his late 20s, was standing outside the vehicle. He wouldn't get near the car. I went over to check him out to look for injuries. There were no major injuries. He had a couple scratches on his face from the glass, but he was more scared than hurt. I asked him what happened, and he just kept saying it ran me off the road. I figured maybe a deer, a bear, or something had ran across in front of him. It definitely is something that happens a lot. But when I pressed him on it, he shook his head. It wasn't an animal. This looked like a big person, covered in hair. Now you've got to understand, I wasn't the guy to entertain nonsense like that. I wrote it off as shock. We walked him back toward the ambulance so I could get his vitals, and that's when the troopers showed up. The guy tried to explain it again, said something tall, wolf-headed, came out of the trees and charged toward the car. Claimed he swerved and went off the road to avoid it. The trooper gave me a look over the guy's shoulder. You know the kind of look. Like, here we go. We got us another crazy one. But then something happened that wiped the smirk right off both our faces. While we were standing there, the woods just all of a sudden went completely quiet. Then, a pretty good distance out, something heavy started moving in the brush. We could hear it, walking. This thing definitely did not care who heard it. We all stood there. The trooper put his hand on his sidearm, not knowing what to expect. My partner grabbed the flashlight off the rig and the driver started babbling. He kept saying, "That's it. That's what I saw." The beam from the flashlight went across the ditch and into the trees. For a half second, we saw eyes. They were bright amber-colored and very high off the ground. They blinked, shifted quickly, and then whatever it was moved deeper into the woods. This wasn't something moving on four legs. It was clear to hear it was walking upright. The trooper finally said, "Get him loaded and clear the scene." That was it. No investigation, no tracking, nothing. No one was about to go anywhere near that tree line. We just got the driver in the ambulance, and the trooper wrote up something in the report later as single vehicle accident. Driver swerved to avoid animal collision. Back at the station, my partner and I tried to talk about what we'd seen, but it went nowhere. He just shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. You know they don't want that in the report. It's nonsense." The driver ended up being fine physically, but mentally, I don't know. The way he kept repeating himself in the back of the ambulance, like he was begging us to believe him, that's ultimately stuck with me over the years. I never actually saw it, but the way he kept rambling and going on and on, I truly believe this man saw one of these things. I never believed or even knew what a dog man was before that night. I didn't even know what one was supposed to look like. But whatever was standing in those trees on two legs, it was watching us, and it was big, way bigger than a human. I'll never forget it. And no one can convince me of what I never saw, but I heard, and this guy was definitely not lying. There's no way. I refuse to believe that. There's too many people coming forward and claiming the same thing. If it has feathers and it walks and quacks like a duck, then most likely you have a duck on your hands. Reels, I think what you're doing is very valuable and very rare. I truly believe you have honest, to God, good intentions. And I do believe you are helping people. Continue on, sir. A concerned EMT, Pennsylvania. Hello, Reels. My encounter goes back to 2016, when I was part of a volunteer search and rescue team in upstate New York. We trained year-round, but real calls were hit or miss. Sometimes it was just hikers who took a wrong turn. Other times it was a bit darker. Missing persons that didn't end well. One weekend we got called in to help look for a middle-aged man who hadn't come home after going out to scout deer stands. He was supposed to check in with his wife before it got dark, but when midnight rolled around and she still hadn't heard from him, she called it in. By morning we had a crew of about 20 people combing the woods near where his truck was parked. It was late, fall, damp, patches of wet leaves and mud that made tracking a lot easier. I was with a partner about a quarter-mile in when we spotted tracks in a soft patch near a creek. I thought they were bear prints, but the longer I looked at them, the less sense that made. Each one was huge, bigger than my boot, and I wear a size 12. The shape just did not look right at all. They weren't round like a bear's paw. They were long, very elongated, actually, with a heel and defined toes like a human footprint. But the toes, you could tell, ended in deep punctures into the ground, like where claws had dug in. It chilled me to even look at these. I could feel the hair on my neck standing. They were in a straight line, not staggered like an animal on 4 legs, but left, right, just like a man walking through. We followed them for a bit, and then they veered off into thicker woods. The stride length was insane. Whatever made those tracks was covering ground way faster than we could. I called it over on the radio, told base we found some unusual prints. The response came back almost instantaneously. Disregard. Continue grid search. I remember just standing there, staring at my radio, thinking, what the hell? We were trained to follow any sign, but this time we were flat out told to ignore it. My partner just said orders are orders, and we moved on, but neither of us liked it at all. The missing guy was found later that evening. He was alive, but definitely shaken up. He was sitting near a old logging road miles back from his truck. He was covered in mud, and he was acting like he'd been through hell. He claimed he got turned around and panicked, but when I tried to ask more, he wouldn't even look me in my eyes. He just kept saying he didn't want to talk about it. He just wanted to go home. Later, back at the firehouse, I had actually taken a few snapshots of these prints. A couple of us were talking and we were studying the pictures. The senior SAR coordinator shut us down. He saw the pictures and almost forcefully made me delete them. He said we don't report things that will cause problems. Stick to the training. His tone made it clear we weren't supposed to push on this issue. That was the first and last time I saw any prints like that. But I know what I saw. I had pictures, and I know we were told to look the other way. It doesn't add up to me at all. I stayed on that team another year, but after that I stepped away. Not because of danger, but because I realized there are rules no one explains to you until you cross them. Rules that I don't necessarily agree with. I understand if no one believes me. I know it seems suspicious, but I'm telling the truth. And I want people to know due to safety reasons alone. If someone else was telling me this story years ago before I saw those tracks, I would push it off and say it's nonsense. But I saw what I saw. It wasn't a hoax. Those were real tracks. They were clear to see. It's definitely took a toll on me mentally. Now every time I walk into the woods, I catch myself looking at the ground more than I used to. If those prints show up again, I want to be ready, and there's no one going to stop me from making it public. If I get a chance, I will publicize this event. Former SAR volunteer. S. New York. Reels. I won't give my name or exact locations of this event due to, well, obvious reasons. It was 2008. I was a deputy in Wisconsin. Out there, we got a lot of calls where it was domestic disputes or you would get livestock loose on the highways. Every so often, we'd get what we called prowler calls. Somebody hearing footsteps around their property or seeing shadows near their barns or tree lines. We never really put things together until after a lot of these calls started coming in that year in 2008. We received way too many of these prowler calls. It definitely was not normal. One night, I myself got dispatched to one of these calls. It was a woman living alone. Said she'd heard something big walking around her house after it got dark. She claimed she could hear this thing breathing heavily outside of her bedroom window, and she was afraid to pull the curtains to look. I drove out there. It was just her and this little farmhouse lit up in the middle of all that black. She met me at the door. This lady was scared to death. Said whatever it was had circled the place for at least half an hour. She swore that it wasn't a human. I did a walk around the property with my flashlight. The ground was wet from rain earlier, so I figured if anyone had been out there, I'd find some boot prints. But the only impression I saw was a very strange one. It was big and looked like a human's bare feet, but with claws dug in at the tips. I'll be honest, I didn't know what to make of it, so I didn't say anything. I was standing near her back fence when I saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. I swung the light, and sure enough, it hit something that was alive and breathing and moving. This something was very tall. It was standing just inside the trees, trying to hide, I suppose. It was watching me. It was probably 6.5, maybe 7 feet tall at the most. It had a very wide chest, and its body was completely covered in what looked like dark fur. The light just barely caught it around the face area. It had a long snout. I could see pointed ears, and its eyes were reflecting a yellow color when the beam hit them. This thing never ran when I spotted it. Didn't even act like it was startled or surprised. It stood there swaying side to side slowly, breathing very heavily. After a brief stare down, it turned and walked away, as slow as could be on 2 legs. I stood frozen until it was gone. My first instinct was to chase it, but there was no way I was going into those woods by myself with that thing out there. When I got back inside, the old woman asked me what I saw. I told her it was nothing, probably just a big dog, and she gave me this look like she knew I was full of crap. Back at the station, I mentioned it to my sergeant. He seemed to get a very serious look on his face and basically told me it's best not to put that in your report. So I didn't. Officially, it was another prowler, unfounded. I never stopped thinking about it. I know what I saw wasn't a dog. I feel for that old lady. I wish there was more I could have done, but obviously it never came back because she never called again. This sure as hell wasn't my imagination. It was standing right there directly in my light where I could see it clearly. After that year, those weird prowler calls seemed to die off. It's something that makes me think that maybe these things are migratory and they just move through the area. I'm not really sure. Just speculation and observation. I'm truly glad I found your channel as I listen to others as well. I try to learn what I can to figure out exactly what these things are because I know they're real. I saw one. Every time someone occasionally brings up those weird prowler calls or someone mentions wolfmen or creatures in their yard, I get rattled. I keep my mouth shut and listen intently. Inside, I know these people are not all making this up. Some of them, sure, maybe. But I know some of them are telling the truth. Anonymous. You can use this if you want. You have full permission. Just leave out any names if you can. I would appreciate it. I was a paramedic for almost a decade in western Kentucky. This was 2013. Our station was attached to a small regional hospital, and a lot of nights we'd sit in the rig outside waiting for a call, drinking horrible coffee and listening to the radio. Nothing special about that night in particular. It was early in the AM hours. I can't be certain to name a specific time, but it was late. It was a very clear sky out that night, and it was a quiet where you can hear the vending machine humming 20 feet away from you. My partner had gone inside to grab a snack. I stayed in the rig, door open, scrolling on my phone. Out of nowhere, the hairs on the back of my neck stood. It was the same feeling you get when someone's staring you down. I thought maybe one of the ER staff had came out, but when I looked toward the trees at the far edge of the parking lot, I saw something crouched there that wasn't ER staff. It was low to the ground like it was trying to stay hidden, but it was too big to really do that successfully. I thought, is that a big dog? As soon as I thought this thing slowly started to rise and it stood up. It straightened up on two legs and it had to be 7 feet tall at least. It had bright yellow eyes and the head of a dog or a wolf. Let's just say canine. Its body was completely, well, not completely. It was covered in light gray, almost silver fur. But around the chest area and on the legs, the fur was super thin, and I could see this weird leathery skin underneath. This was definitely something physically really there. This was not a costume. This was not a prank or a prop. This was something breathing and blinking. It looked like around the neck and the sides of the face it had really thick, long hair. It reminded me of a lion's mane. I could see its hands on its front arms or legs. It looked like human-shaped hands but stretched out longer. It was weirdly flexing its fingers, making a fist, then opening its hands over and over. I'm no animal expert, but this thing was displaying behaviors akin to wanting to attack me or showing aggression. It seemed angry for no reason. The look it was giving me was a look of hatred, a look of disdain, like it hated me for reasons I was unaware of. I sat there in the driver's seat, hand halfway to the radio but not pressing the button. It stood there, staring straight through me. It finally started walking, like it owned the damn place. It crossed the edge of the parking lot, never breaking eye contact with me. I could still see its claws flexing on its hands as it moved. It passed behind one of the ambulances parked down the row, and when it came out the other side, it had dropped back into a crouched and slipped position on all fours. Then it just went off into the trees. It was gone, and it never made a sound. When my partner came back out a minute later, I was still gripping the steering wheel. He asked me if I was okay, and I couldn't even get any words to come out. I didn't tell anyone for a few weeks. When I finally mentioned it to an older medic who'd been there a lot longer than me, all I said was, "Have you ever seen anything weird out here in the parking lot at night?" He just stared at me and shook his head, but he would not talk about it. I don't know if he knew what I meant when I said something weird, but he sure acted like he did. That's when all of it hit me like a bus. This wasn't just some freak thing I'd seen. I think others had seen it as well, and we were all keeping quiet for reasons I don't know. I guess what matters is I'm coming forward now. When you see something you can't explain to anyone, you don't know how to approach the conversation, so you just stay quiet. That is, until you find a group of people like this group, where you feel comfortable enough to come forward and you're not going to get ridiculed or belittled. Now, if you or anyone's wondering, I do still work EMS. But I park a lot closer to the doors now. I haven't seen it again. I don't sit alone in dark lots anymore either. When people laugh about dogman encounter stories, I just keep my mouth shut. Because late that night, in that hospital parking lot, I learned the hard way that these are all not just stories. Thank you, Reels. P. Western Kentucky. Hi, Reels. I hope writing this down helps not only me, but others who seek to find truth. I know that's all I seek. I'm trying to nutshell it. The encounters are many. I think they might be related somehow from the 1970s to 2025. Let's get started. My name I won't give here because I get the feeling as I bring this into the light, there are those who don't want it there. So you can call me Raven. This happened back in the late 70s. I had fled my boyfriend. I had to. Something, call it God, call it personal angels. Something was watching over me because I left with very little money, a jacket, and the clothes on my back, ballerina slippers on my feet, and the faith that everything would be fine. Fast forward a bit. I was able to stay in a small cabin in a place called Heart Lake near Guthrie in northern Minnesota. It was late August, early September. The weather was getting cool at night. My friend, a deputy for the Cass Lake Police Department, worked the overnight, so I was able to stay a few nights and watch over the cabin and his dog Nick, a beautiful and very shy Malamute, whose doghouse sat right below the bedroom window at the back of the cabin. The cabin sat amongst 2 or 3 other rather decrepit little cabins in the owner's home. This used to be a small resort. It had a nearly unused landing for boats. The cabins and house set in amongst the trees, the forest encroaching on all of it. The area to this day is mostly woods, some farmland and hay fields, but mostly forest, tax forfeit, and state land. Very wild. The sun had set, and we'll call my friend Joe. He left for his overnight shift. I'd say it was somewhere around 9:30 or 10 at night. I remember I was tired and looking forward to a good night's sleep. I laid down and drifted off. I have no idea how long before I was dragged up out of sleep by a growl, but I had been so far down that I couldn't tell if maybe I had been dreaming. So I lay with my senses alert, waiting to see if the sound would come again. I was feeling a bit uneasy, so I got up, fumbling to find the light switch. I found one, flicked it on, and it lit the kitchen, which sent light into all the little rooms of the cabin. I went to the sink, running water for a drink and looking out the window into the night. Besides the inadequate outside light of the owner's home, it was very dark. I drank some water and set down the glass when the growling returned. It was a deep and rolling sound that rattled the floor underneath my feet. My mind went to the dog, Nick. The growling was coming from the direction of where his shelter sat under the bedroom window, so I'm thinking it's Nick. I had never heard of Dogman. I had heard of Bigfoot, but that was the farthest thing from my mind. In my mind, I'm thinking Nick is facing something down, so I decide to go get the dog. When I think about it now, it's not very bright, but I had no real reference to cryptids of any kind. The growling was so unusual for this shy, timid guy. I was afraid for him. In fact, I had never heard anything so deep that it vibrated floors and set off every alarm your senses have. My only thought was to get the dog. So out into the night I went. It's so long ago now I cannot remember if I had a flashlight, but I must have, because I remember coming around the side of the cabin to the back and following the chain from the stake to his shelter against the back of the cabin. He was all the way in the back, and I had to drag him out. The look on his face was, "Are you crazy?" I did notice there was no shadows cast to my right, where there were shrubs and trees. It was just black, just one roiling mass of black. I unhooked the chain and, hanging onto his collar, quickly walked back around to the door and into the cabin. When I let him go, he scuttled into the bedroom. After I locked the door, I found him under the bed, and he was not coming out. I turned out the light and felt my way back to the bed, where I didn't lay for long before I was hit by a feeling of dread. It took hold of my senses, making sure I knew it was there. From the window above my head, I observed first tiny orb-like lights filtering in through the window. Then they slowly grew in size, some white, some bluish, others a light orange, beautiful to look at but awful and dark in feeling. When people say they feel evil with these beings, believe them. That description fits. It's penetrating in a way that seems to move you toward a state of panic, like you are being tested. Just how much of this mean, evil frequency are you going to be able to take before you break? Just a brief pause to give this person applause and credit for how they described that. I could not have described that feeling any better. That is spot on. Bravo. I sat up with my back to the wall underneath the window, cross-legged. First I prayed, calling on Jesus, and the feeling got worse. Then I started visualizing light around me, strengthening its boundaries around me, visualizing mirrors facing outward so whatever was before me could see nothing but itself. This took a lot of effort and time, more like a tug of war. Honestly, it felt like I was trespassing on its territory and only my own effort was allowed. I was being tested. Nothing, not Jesus, nothing but myself. I either passed the test or I would be broken. I had never been put in a position like this, but I kept working on the mirrors and light, staying away from fear. These were the only things that began to slowly neutralize its power. Just before the sun rose, I felt its hold drop. The test was over, and I had passed its test. Dogman? Was this Dogman territory? Anubis tests or weighs the heart of man. I don't know, it's a question. It was not until later in my life that Dogman became a possible answer. Little did I know that in a strange and unusual way I had become a part of someone else's story. Here's the next part of the story. Use it or not. It's up to you, Reels. The next day, Joe comes home and tells me that if I would like, I have the opportunity to babysit a cabin and a German Shepherd while the owner visits his family in California. The little house sits on about 40 acres just outside of Guthrie, so not far from Heart Lake and the above incident. I remember the driveway was long. On the right side sat a brushy swamp, and to the left, pastures, its boundaries and old worn sections of barbed wire and rotting wood posts. A long time since anything was pastured there. Then to the right, the little one-story house, blue in color, came into view, appearing to sit on the highest point on the land, which wasn't all that high. We parked the truck and Joe unlocked the door and showed me around his friend's place. I didn't mind no running water and splitting wood to cook and heat. It was an adventure. It had electricity and the dog was huge, almost black, maybe one of the best-looking German shepherds I had laid eyes on, about 30 inches at its back. We were fast friends and all seemed good. His name was Jaeger. I had been there a few nights when in the late morning someone drove up and knocked on the door. The dog Jaeger came with me, and as I opened the door there stood a native man. Jaeger stood between me and the man. I remember his name. I will show you reels, but we don't repeat it here. We will call him D. He introduced himself. "Hello, my name is D." Out of nowhere he starts telling me about himself, and I'm thinking, who does this? Who knocks on doors and tells you their history? He says I'm half Ojibwe, and my older brother took me to our people's sacred ground, a place of testing. It's there. He points back over his shoulder where my people still have the rights to rice on Heart Lake. When he said that, I was dumbstruck. He went on, "Yeah, my brother took me there. He didn't say why. He brought me into the woods not far from the water and left me. It was getting dark. I was told to stay put, so I did. Something came. It tested me. I was young, very young. I will never be the same. It did something to me." How would this man know to come here and talk openly about what had happened to him if he didn't know that I had a similar experience? He said, "Hey, that dog, will he attack me?" Jaeger stood taller, looking the man in the eye, and I said, "He will." D stepped back, and I felt the return of evil. Jaeger gave a low warning growl. D turned and got back in his car and drove away. I was stunned. What the HE double hockey sticks was that? The worst part was that I knew he was coming back. For me. I knew, like I knew my name. While I was pondering this, it wasn't long before I heard Joe's truck coming up the drive, so I looked out, and sure enough, it was Joe. He came inside, and I told him what had transpired, in fact, telling him the whole story, all of it. He brushed it off. Then I said, "Look, this guy is coming back. I know it." Joe brushed off that bit of information faster than the last. I was thinking, why would someone think I was making this up? How do I get him to believe me? This guy is coming back. As I'm thinking on this, him standing there in his deputy's uniform and badge, I'm thinking that attitude doesn't make for a good cop. We can hear a car coming up the drive. I told you, Joe. He's back. I said I cannot remember exactly what Joe said, but it was something about how this couldn't be the D guy. The car stops, you hear footsteps come to the door. The dog growls quietly, and there's a knock. Joe opens the door, and there stands D, looking at Joe and saying, "I thought you would be meeting me at the door with a gun." The two of them stared at one another. Joe stunned as he realized I was right. Joe took him outside, talking to him. I couldn't hear it all, but D left, and Joe taught me how to use his friend's gun. Well, there you go. How it all begins. There's more. Let me know if you want the rest. It's gonna be a long one. Thanks again, Reels, and thanks for doing what you do. But most of all, doing it well. Raven. Hey there, Reels. To start off, I want you to know I'm not the kind of person who jumps to wild conclusions. My wife and I have lived in the same house outside Johnson City for going on 20 years now. We've seen everything from black bear to weird folks cutting through the woods at night, but nothing that ever made us scared to live here. Until last fall. The first thing happened on a Wednesday night right around 2 a.m. I woke up thinking someone was at the back door. It wasn't a loud pounding. It was this slow, spaced-out knocking. It was always in 3 solid taps every 15 or 20 seconds. We don't have any close neighbors. so I figured maybe one of the grandkids got in trouble or something. I got up, picked up a flashlight, and went to the back hallway. The knocking stopped the second I turned the corner. I turned on the porch light and looked outside, but the motion sensor didn't trigger. The yard was empty. The dogs in the living room were just staring toward the door. Their ears were straight up. They was making no sounds, no whining, growling, or barking. They were just oddly staring. That was weird enough to make my stomach feel weird. Nothing happens. I go back to bed. Carry on with life. The very next night, the same time, same pattern. 3 knocks. It was steady enough that I started counting seconds between each one. I even yelled out, "Who's there?" a couple times. And I swear each time I would yell, I could hear a low sound like someone exhaling through their nose, deep and heavy, right against the wood. When I opened the curtain, the only thing I caught was a smear of black hair or fur right below the window. It moved before I could focus the flashlight, like it ducked down out of sight. By the third night, I decided I'd be ready. I waited in the dark with my phone camera open and the back porch light off. Sure enough, at 1:58 a.m., the 3 knocks came, dead even. I hit the light switch. What I saw, only there for a split second. A very broad and tall figure pressed up against the door. Its hand, if you could call it that, was wide with long fingers that bent in wrong directions. Its nails were scraping into the frame like it was trying to break the door frame or test the grain. Its head was way up there. I could see part of its face in the glass, but only part of it. It was too tall. I could see half of a canine snout. I could see a yellow eye reflecting. It was about the size of a dime, if I had to guess. They were faced in the front like a predator, and they were spaced apart because this animal's head was huge. I didn't think. I fired one shot through the bottom of the door with my .38 and heard it crash into the steps outside. The dogs went berserk. When I opened the door, there was blood smeared all over the wood, but no body, no drag marks. There was nothing else. It never came back, no more knocking. But for weeks we would find weird prints. They were too big to be a dog, but they were definitely canine. We followed them, and most of the time they would circle the back of the house. The easiest time to find them would be after every rain. Whatever it was, it did not seem to care that it left prints behind. My wife still won't use that door if it's dark out. We replaced it with steel, but she says it doesn't matter if it wanted in. She told me it could get in, and I have to agree. I don't know what dogmen are. I don't even know for sure that that's what I saw, but what else could it have been? I've lived here my whole life. I know what black bear tracks look like. These weren't bear. They were human-shaped with claws that bit deep enough to chip the concrete steps. You tell me what kind of canine is so big and heavy with claws sharp enough to chip concrete steps. I'll wait. Rick and Paula H., Washington County, Tennessee. The subject line of this next email says, "Reels, it tried to break down my door." And this one is from Kentucky. Hey man, I'm not sure how to start this. I'm not much of a writer. I just figured if anyone's going to want to hear this, or it could be spread around to help someone else, you would be the guy. Been listening for a while. Anyway, this happened in March. of last year, just outside of London, Kentucky. I'm a single dad. I live in a double wide with my daughter, Emma. She's 13 now. Anyway, it was in the middle of the week, and it was one of those spring storms that just kind of sits over you for hours. It makes you wait for the catastrophe to hit. There was wind, thunder, the whole thing. Emma had gone to bed early because she had a test the next morning. I was sitting in the living room watching the Weather Channel when I heard something slam into the back porch. It sounded like a tree limb maybe fell, except it didn't sound like wood hitting wood. It sounded more like meat on metal. I got up thinking maybe part of the roof tin came loose. Before I even reached the kitchen, the motion light clicked on, and I saw this shadow move past the window. Not a small one either. It was definitely upright. It was definitely big. And this thing was fast as hell. The doorknob started rattling violently, not jiggling like a person trying to sneak in. I mean twisting and yanking hard enough that the whole door was flexing. I heard Emma scream from down the hall, asking who is out there, what's going on, and I told her to stay put and lock the door. I grabbed a 20 gauge from the corner closet and yelled out that I was armed. The second I said that, something hit the door so hard the top hinge popped a screw. I fired through the screen, just a warning shot, really, and everything went dead quiet except for the rain. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, there were these huge gouges, 5 of them, running straight down the metal door like somebody had grabbed and pulled. They were deep enough to catch your fingernail in. That's pretty damn deep. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy came out, took one look, and asked if I had anyone mad at me or any enemies. When I told him what I saw, he just smirked and said it was probably just a bear then. I've seen bears. This thing's shoulder was above the window line. It wasn't a damn bear. This thing was probably 9 feet tall, if I had to guess. The next day in the daylight, I found a few weird-looking prints down the mud line behind the porch. They weren't boots. They weren't paws either. They were long, narrow, and you could see where something like claws had been pressed into the mud like nails digging in. I patched the door, replaced the hinge, and I haven't let my daughter sleep on that side of the trailer since. She still brings it up all the time when it storms especially. Says she hears heavy breathing at her window sometimes. Maybe you'll read this on your channel. I just needed somebody to believe me because around here, if you talk about stuff like that, you're either drunk, crazy, or you're told to shut up and don't talk about it. I appreciate you taking the time to read this. You're a great guy, and I truly respect you. Mark, Laurel County, Kentucky. This is a wild one. Well, they're all wild, but trust me, this one is, yeah. Hey, Reels. Now, I've gone back and forth with myself at least a dozen times about whether I wanted to do this. This has been sitting in my drafts folder for 2 weeks. My wife says I'm making too much of it, but she didn't see what I saw that night. We live outside of Marquette, Michigan, about 15 minutes from town, just off County Road 550. The house was built in the 60s. It's old block basement, oil furnace, low ceilings. We bought it because of the location. Quiet, cheap, kind of tucked back into the woods. It's too quiet sometimes, honestly. The first strange event took place in December 3 years ago. I kept hearing noises down in the basement after midnight. Not creaks or pipes, this was actual movement. like someone dragging their foot slowly across the floor. I'd go down there with a flashlight and a pistol, and I would find nothing or no one. Then I'd come back up and find the dog pacing at the top of the steps. My wife, of course, hinted at the place being haunted, but again, that stuff is nonsense in my opinion. I figured it was probably raccoons. That was what got my vote. We do get them a lot. But the smell changed one night. It wasn't that musky animal smell that you'd expect from a raccoon. It was like wet iron, maybe blood. It's hard to explain. The air just felt thicker. Everything felt heavy. You could feel a dark presence. If anyone knows, they'll understand. Anyway, fast forward to the week before Christmas. It was one of those long snowstorms that stacked up 2 feet overnight. I remember because the plow hadn't come through yet. Around 10 that night, I was sitting on the couch half asleep when the power started flickering. It flashed once, twice, and then completely cut off. Total blackout. The only light was from the wood stove through the hallway. I went down to the basement to flip the breaker, which I'd done before during storms. The flashlight caught the frost coming off my breath. It's always cold down there, but this time it felt like walking into a freezer. I turned the corner toward the breaker box, and something had torn the insulation out from behind the furnace. It looked like something had crawled in from the outside vent. There was snow blown halfway across the floor and these wet prints. Just long impressions like fingers dragging. When I crouched down, that smell hit me again. Metallic. My flashlight started dimming right then. I don't know if it was the batteries or what, but the light faded until I could barely see. That's when I heard it breathing behind the furnace. These deep, slow breaths with a whistle at the end of each inhale like a lung full of fluid. I whispered my wife's name, praying, even though I knew, but she didn't answer. I backed up, hit my shoulder on the wall, and dropped the flashlight. It spun around on the floor, and in a split second it flicked on, before it went out completely. I saw the side of something's face peeking from behind that furnace. It was gray. It looked wet, and it had coarse hair running up its jawline. The eyes caught what little light was left and reflected a yellow, amberish color. I ran up the stairs so fast I hit my shin on the top step. I slammed the door and locked it. I dragged the kitchen table over it without even thinking. My wife came out, panicking, saying, "What are you doing?" But I couldn't even talk for a minute. I was out of my mind. We called the cops the next morning. He came out, went down there, and said he didn't see anything. He pointed out that the vent was loose and probably a raccoon had got in and spooked me. I asked him if he'd ever seen a raccoon pull a steel vent cover off the outside wall. He just looked at me and didn't answer. Yeah, I didn't think so. We moved out of there 3 months later. The realtor told us the new buyers wanted to refinish the basement. I didn't say a word about any of it. I still have a photo somewhere on my old phone of those long marks in the snow just outside the vent. I never showed it to anyone. It's one of those pictures you don't even want to look at twice, really. I'll try to dig it up. If I do find it and have time, I will send it so you can add it to this encounter. I don't care what anyone calls it. Dogman, werewolf, wolfman, whatever you feel fits it best. But something came up through that vent that night. I could smell it, I could hear it, and I swear it was thinking about coming farther in before I interrupted. We live in a small rental now in town. No basement, no woods around us. My wife calls it our safe house. But sometimes when the heat kicks on, I still catch that same smell in the air. cold metal and something sour underneath it. It's probably all in my head, especially after going through something like that. I can't help but wonder if that thing is still out there around that house, crawling through someone else's vent now. I truly hope not. Jason M., Marquette, Michigan. Brother Reels. I'm writing this while I'm sitting on my porch. I'm half hoping I don't hear what I think I hear every night. It's been almost a year since everything started, and it's still not completely gone. I live just outside Harrison, Arkansas, on a small piece of family land that backs up to timber company property. My granddad left me the place when he passed. It's a double-wide with a tin roof and a couple of old outbuildings that I keep my tools and lawnmowers in. It's mostly quiet out here except for coyotes and the occasional logging truck late at night. I keep a few chickens and a garden. Last spring, something started messing with the coop around 2 or 3 in the morning. At first, the suspect in mind was a fox or a neighbor's dog. I'd find the latch bent, wire pushed in like something was trying to get in from the outside. I put a padlock on it and figured that would be the end of it. I barricaded it a little bit, enough to keep a small rodent from getting in. That's what I thought I was dealing with. A week later, I woke up to the most awful screaming I've ever heard in my life. It wasn't the chickens. It was coming from the tree line behind the coop. Long and high, but with a growl in it that you felt in your chest. I grabbed my 30-30 and stepped out with a spotlight. Rain had just started spitting, and the light hit mist, so it could only see 20 feet or so. Something was standing behind that coop. I saw shoulders and a head shaped like a dog's, but higher than any dog or anything else should have ever been. It moved when the light hit it, almost like it burned its skin. It didn't move backwards, it moved sideways like it was trying to circle around me. I fired immediately once and heard it crash through the woods. I didn't see any blood, but the smell was there. I could smell something rotten and smelled like a wet dog. The next morning I went out and found no prints in the mud. Found nothing, actually. And I'm sure there's a lot of people, if you use this, will be saying, well, I would have done this. Why didn't you do that? You should have called this person. You should have called the cops. Yeah, I hear all that. And hindsight's 20/20, remember that. I honest to God didn't know what the hell to do. So, I just carried on with my day and tried to be cautious and keep an eye out because I didn't know what this was or if it was going to come back. And sure enough, that night, it did. It didn't make a sound until after midnight. Then the side of the trailer shook like someone hit it with a sledgehammer. The window by my bed rattled so hard the curtain hooks fell off. I sat there with the gun in my hands, listening to it breathe outside the wall for maybe 5 minutes, which felt like an eternity. You can tell yourself you won't be scared when something like that happens. You'll be a hero. You'll be the first one to ever take one of these things down. But I could barely move. For a few weeks it was a pattern, always between 1 and 3 in the morning, sometimes scratching on the walls, sometimes just pacing. I set trail cameras around the coop in the backyard. All I got were blurry frames where the lens was fogged on the camera and it was tilted. One photo had a shape in it that looked like a hand with something on it, but it was half cut off by the edge of the frame, and no one is going to look at that and know what they're seeing. About a month in, I shot at it again. I heard a hit. I heard it thump. That sound you hear when a bullet goes into something solid but soft. I heard a snarl that sounded like a person screaming through a blender, and it took off into the trees. I thought that was going to be it. But after that, it started finding small things to do. I found things moved around the yard each morning. Tools, feed buckets. Even the wheelbarrow once was flipped over and thrown across the yard about 50 feet. Or moved, I don't know if it threw it or what. It's like it was trying to let me know that it was still there and now it was angry. The worst night was in June. It was hot, and still there was no wind. I was on the couch when I heard knuckles drag down the siding, long and slow like it was tracing the length of the house. Then it stopped right by the kitchen window. I didn't look out this time. I didn't even move. I just sat there and listened to it breathe through the screen, praying that it would just leave. I'd already shot this thing with a .30-30 once, and I know I hit it. It seems to not affect it at all. I don't know if it ever left for good. By August, everything got quiet again. There was no more smells, no more activity at all. There has been a couple nights that the dogs will start whining and staring at the back door. I'll go out and check, and I'll find nothing. Just the edge of the woods and a little bit of fog every now and then moving in the trees. Any type of movement now completely freaks me out, and I go into defense mode. These things will take a mental toll on you, like you can't believe. People around here still say it was a bear, or maybe someone out there messing with me. Yeah, sure. Someone that took a round from a .30-30 and just kept coming back for more. Fine, let them think that, I guess. I know what was out there, I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. Whatever it was, it learned that I could shoot at it. It learned that I could hurt it. But it also learned that I live alone. I keep 2 guns loaded now, and a floodlight on the coop. I haven't had fresh eggs in months because I can't bring myself to restock the chickens. Every time I hear something move outside, I half expect to see that thing out there. I don't really know if it's coming back, and if it does, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I guess I'm just going to unload on this thing and pray that I win the fight. Anyway, that's my story. Do what you want with it. Just don't use my last name. D. in Boone County, Arkansas. Hello, Reels. I'm not even sure what I'd call what happened to me. Maybe incident is the right word. I still drive that same road every day for work, but only during daylight now. I'll give you the rundown as best I can remember it. This was just over 2 years ago, in October, outside of Kittening, Pennsylvania. I worked maintenance for a school district. That week we were doing a roof job at one of the smaller elementary schools, and I'd been staying late locking up equipment. The night this happened, it was a little after 9:30 when I finally headed home. The route I take cuts through a stretch of back road called Beach Hollow. There's nothing out there, just trees crowding both sides of the road. It's only about 7 miles long, but at night it feels endless. It was cold that evening. It was cold enough that the air would burn your nose. I had the heater running full blast and the radio on. About a mile in, I saw something up ahead near the ditch. I thought for sure it was a deer, so I slowed down, not wanting to smash it. I turned the high beams on, and that's when this thing straightened up. Just stood there, on 2 legs right by the guardrail. I hit the brakes so hard the seatbelt caught me in my chest and left a bruise. Whatever it was, it turned its head toward the car, and the light hit its face. Orange reflection, not red like an animal's. It had dark fur, patchy in spots. Its arms hung low like it wasn't sure what to do with them. It was the craziest damn thing I've ever seen in my life. I sat there maybe 5 seconds before it moved. It dropped down on all fours slowly, and ran across the road in front of me so fast it looked like a blur. I could see its back flex, the shoulder blades moving like a dog running. But this thing was too big, it was too damn long. I remember the sound of its nails hitting the road and sharp clicks, 4 or 5 of them before it was just gone into the trees on the other side. I waited a minute, then started rolling again, just crawling along. About half a mile later, I heard something behind me. I glanced in the mirror and I swore I saw the shape in the red glow of my taillights running on the shoulder. I tried to convince myself at the time it was just my imagination, but my gut was already tying itself in knots. It's funny what your brain will do in moments like this. You try to convince yourself that what you're seeing with your own eyes isn't really there. By the time I hit the next turn, I couldn't see anything. I sped up, just wanting to reach the main road. Then there was a thump from the back end of the car, like someone had dropped a sandbag onto the trunk. I looked in the mirror again, and there was nothing there. The second I eased off the gas, another thump, this time a lot heavier and closer to the rear window. That's when I floored it. I was through with this situation. I didn't care what it was. I knew it was big, and it was scary, and it was after me. That's all I needed to know. The car started fishtailing on the wet pavement, and something slammed into the rear quarter panel. I could hear something that sounded like a knife on metal. I remember screaming out loud, just yelling nonsense. When I hit 60, it finally slid off the car. I made it home maybe 10 minutes later and sat in the driveway with the lights still on. I couldn't even move. I finally forced myself out to look. There were these huge gashes in the trunk lid. 5 parallel lines cut deep into the paint. They were almost deep enough to hit metal. The back window was smeared with mud or grease like a handprint, but too wide to be human or animal. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time a car would pass by, the light would hit my curtains and I'd think it was back. The next morning I went to work like nothing happened, but I took a detour around Beach Hollow. 2 days later, my buddy from the shop said, "What the hell happened to your car?" I just told him I backed into something. I didn't want to explain it. A few weeks later, I got curious and went back through there in the daytime. I stopped where it crossed the road. I didn't see anything suspicious or anything that I could use as, yeah, this thing was really here. I guess I was trying to prove to myself it wasn't real, even after seeing the damage to my car. I still drive the same car, but the damages, of course, have been repaired. It just felt like proof of something no one would believe anyway. What good does it do you to have any kind of proof it's all fake and a hoax, right? Yeah, I'm gonna destroy the trunk of my car just to trick someone into believing my story. That doesn't even make sense. I'm not quite that pathetic and lonely. I've never really discussed it fully with my wife. She just knows I won't drive that road anymore, especially after dark. I'll take the long way around every time. 20 extra minutes. It's cheaper than the kind of nightmare that road gave me that night. I hope one day we figure out what these things are, or what their purpose is. I personally think there's some sort of supernatural biblical explanation, but that's a different email. Rob, Armstrong County, Pennsylvania. I'm not a fan of typing long things, so I'm not going to horse around with this. I live outside Pikeville, Kentucky. Back in the spring of 2020, when everybody was locked down and the world felt like it stopped, me and my 2 best friends, C and L,
started clearing some new trails on C's family land. We couldn't go anywhere. We were laid off work, so we figured we'd spend some time riding the ATVs and cutting some new paths through the back ridge. Now, mind you, this place is some pretty thick woods. It's mostly oak and poplar, and half of it hadn't been touched in years. We'd ride up with gas cans and chainsaws and spend the day sweating, cutting brush, and dragging limbs. It was just something to do, so we didn't go crazy sitting at home. One evening, near the end of April, we were working later than usual. The light was starting to fade to gray time when the hills swallow the sun before it's dark anywhere else. The three of us were finishing a curve where the trail bends around a small field. I had the shovel, C was on the saw, and L was up on the ridge pulling loose branches. The very first thing that happened was this crash up on the ridge. Loud, heavy, like a tree trunk hitting dirt. Then came another sound a lot closer, a deep popping noise from something stepping hard on dry branches. I looked up, expecting to see a deer run through, but it wasn't running. It was coming down the ridge fast. The brush started thrashing, and whatever it was stopped right at the edge of the field, and we could see it. It was standing upright, tall, lean, covered in dark, wet-looking fur that clumped around the shoulders and neck. The chest was broad. The arms were long enough that it had hands that hung below the waist. The face was stretched forward like a wolf's, but the eyes were set like a person's. It looked at us the way a man looks at something he's about to grab. Then it slammed its hand against a dead tree beside it. The whole trunk split halfway up and fell over like kindling. The sound hit harder than a gunshot. It dropped into a half-crouch, head low, shoulders rolling forward, teeth showing. I swear it looked ready to spring on us. Nobody made any rash, quick movements. We all just looked at each other, and we knew. Back up. Don't run. We all started stepping toward the ATVs. The thing growled again, short, sharp, like it came from its chest. When C turned the key and started the four-wheeler, the sound seemed to set it off again. It stomped really hard on the ground one time and threw its head back and made this awful, clipped bark, almost like a warning. We didn't wait to figure out what came next. C gunned it. I jumped on behind him, and L took off right after. We hit the main path so fast I nearly fell off the back. When we reached the clearing by the barn, we just sat there for a minute with the engine still running. Nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Finally, L spoke up. "What the hell did we just see?" C shook his head and said, "I have no idea. But it's definitely not a bear, which a bear is the only thing that could be that big. Did you see how that thing broke that tree?" Of course, our conversations continued like this for a while. I mean, what are you supposed to think? The biggest predator in this area would be a black bear, and there's just no way. I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. I got on the computer and typed every word I could think of. Upright wolf, Kentucky. Creature walking like a man. Wolf, face. Creature standing up. That's when I found pages talking about dogman encounters. Most of what I read sounded crazy, but the drawings and descriptions, those were dead on. The more I looked, the more I read, the more I heard, the more I realized how many people had seen the same thing, all across the country. Most of them said it happened in places where new houses or roads were being cut into deep woods. I did make that connection. It made sense to me, and it still does. We were back there tearing up ground and probably hadn't
ground that hadn't been touched in decades. Maybe it was just defending its space. Now, we stayed out of there. Well, that section of the ridge, anyway. The trail's still unfinished, and I imagine it will never be finished. C keeps saying we should sell the land off before someone else sees what we did. I don't know what good that would do. These things aren't stuck in one holler. If we just keep pushing farther into their woods, people, it's just going to keep pushing them out closer to us. The more we encroach upon their land, the more these things are going to continue to happen. Use common sense, folks. This isn't that big of a mystery. Now, the mystery is what they are, or where they came from, or how they came to be. But as far as the encounters and how frequent, that's not a mystery to me at all. We are encroaching upon their territory. They have nowhere else to go. Just think about it. Anonymous. Reels. What I'm about to share with you happened on my uncle's property just south of Eufaula, Oklahoma, in the spring of 2021. My uncle's place runs about 60 acres, mostly pasture with a few wooded draws that lead down to a pond. That pond's always been kind of a headache. It's spring-fed but fills with silt every few years, and in early 21 he decided to drain it, dig it out deeper, and put in new overflow pipe. He's got a small dozer and told me to come up and help after work. We started draining it through a trench we'd cut into the lowest side. After a few days, the water dropped enough that we could walk the bottom in boots. There was a soft spot near the east bank where water still trickled in a narrow opening. It looked like a washout that had turned into a short tunnel. We figured it was where muskrats or beavers had burrowed in. Late one evening, we were checking that spot when we heard something breathing inside of it. Not bubbles, this weird gasping sound. I yelled in there, thinking maybe a calf had fallen through from the pasture above. The air that came back out smelled like wet clay and iron. Then the breathing stopped. My uncle told me to step back while he shined his flashlight down into the hole. The light hit something slick and dark about 6 or 7 feet back. It looked like wet hide. For a second it moved, just enough to catch a glint of the silhouette. Whatever it was definitely big, and you could see muscle all over this thing. My uncle said, "That's no beaver." Then it started moving forward. The whole hole seemed to exhale. Mud started sliding, water sloshing everywhere. He dropped the light and grabbed my arm and started screaming, "Back up." When the thing came out, it wasn't crawling. It pushed itself up like it was used to standing. It came halfway out of the tunnel, shoulders and chest first. The head cleared the edge, and that's when I saw the snout, the teeth, the eyes set back and shining a yellow from the flashlight still on the ground. It let out a low rumble. It was deep, and I could feel it in my stomach. It slammed one of its hands against the mud bank, and I don't know if it was trying to pull itself out or warning us, but it sank its claws in and tore a groove almost a foot deep. My uncle fired his pistol into the ground in front of it. The thing jerked back a little and took off into the tunnel. The pond water surged like something big had gone under it. We didn't stick around. We climbed onto the side-by-side and took the long route back to the barn. Neither of us really knew what to say. He finally told me not to mention it to my aunt or the neighbors. The next morning, he said he went back alone. He said the tunnel had collapsed sometime during the night, like something forced its way through from underneath. The water was rising again. He filled the trench with clay and just called it done. I spent that evening on the computer and on my phone. I'm still trying to figure out what kind of animal this is and what could do that and why. The more I'm trying to learn, the more confused I become. There's so many people talking about these walking wolves, especially around this part of Oklahoma. They talk about things seen all over these hills and not to mention all over the world. Every description I hear, most of them anyway, matched what we saw. I'm not saying that thing was for certain a dogman. All I know is what it wasn't, and it wasn't supposed to be there. We've still got that pond, but nobody fishes it or goes around it anymore. It's just sitting there. Anonymous, Eufaula, Oklahoma. Hey, bud. Just call me T. I was born and raised in Michigan, and I've got a story that still gets me roasted every deer season by my friends. They call me Bigfoot's electrician, which is not nearly as funny to me as it is to them. It was October 2022. I work for an electrical contractor that does line maintenance and storm repair. It's not really exciting, but mostly clearing brush and keeping lines open for consumers' energy. This work is work where you'll get muddy, sunburned, and a bit of mosquito bites. Actually, bit by every mosquito in the state. Anyway, we kept getting trouble reports on a section that runs along an old power line cut behind some hunting land. Every couple weeks, same pole, same line down. No storm damage, no rot, just the whole pole yanked sideways, like something leaned on it or just grabbed it and shifted it. I kept telling my foreman it had to be the soil shifting. He said then quit complaining and fix the dirt. So one afternoon, it's just me and another guy that we'll call R. We were finishing a replacement job out there. It was late. The sun was going down, the air was cooling off. I was already daydreaming about dinner and trying to remember if I had any clean socks left at home. R is up in the bucket, bolting the cross arm, and I'm on the ground rolling some wire. Out of nowhere, he goes, "Man, something's moving down there." I look where he's pointing, and sure enough, there's movement in the brush, maybe 50, 60 yards away, just off the cut. I told him it's probably just a deer to calm down, which is hilarious, because if I'd just shut up, we could have gone home pretending it was. Instead, I had to walk toward it like I knew what I was doing. The grass was pretty high, and you could hear whatever it was moving. I took about 3 steps closer, and this thing stood up. I don't mean it popped up, I mean this thing rose to an extremely ridiculous height. One motion, smooth as a person getting out of a chair, only it just kept going until the top of its head cleared the brush by a few feet. It was shaped like a man, but something else. Its shoulders were broader, its legs were too bent. The head was longer, and the ears looked like a German shepherd's. The eyes were a bronze shine. R yelled something I can't repeat on here, and I won't. He started dropping the bucket before I could even move. I backed away slowly, trying not to trip over the wire roll. The thing stepped out into the open and looked right at us. It grabbed the down line like it wanted to test it out. I swear on my paycheck it gave the pole a shove and the whole thing creaked. That was all I needed to see. I yelled up, "Start the truck." And R started the truck. We left that job site looking like a NASCAR pit stop. We hit pavement, and he said, "You gonna tell the boss?" I said, "No way," because the boss already thinks I'm lazy.
He doesn't need to think I'm crazy along with it. Later that night, over a couple beers, we looked up wolves on our phones and did the math. I found a forum about dogman sightings in Michigan. Now, I'd heard about these things before, but very little. I used to not pay very much attention to any kind of ghost or booger stories. I just about spit my drink when I saw Baldwin listed as a hot spot. That is where this happened, very close. R still debates that it could have been a prank, but I always ask him, have you ever seen a prankster that could move a utility pole? He don't have much to say after that. He's just like me, he's in denial to protect himself mentally. For the record, that line's been solid ever since then. Whatever was knocking it down must have decided we finally took the hint. T. A little bit about me. I live about 15 miles south of Harrison, Arkansas. Back in 2019, I was working for a local rock hauling company. We'd haul gravel out of an old quarry that hadn't been active full-time in years, mostly just when county jobs came up. That place sat deep in the Ozark hills, surrounded by woods. The pit itself was down a steep drop, maybe 100 feet from the main access road. When you shut off your truck, all you could hear was frogs, wind, and the echo from water dripping off the rock wall. It had a way of making you feel smaller than you wanted to admit. Most nights I ran solo loads, just me, the truck, and the loader operator that we'll call Mike. We'd fill tarp and head out. Nothing to it, really. But one Friday in July, Mike called off sick, and the foreman told me to keep an eye on the site until the backup loader showed up from town. I figured I'd just nap in the cab, why not? I had the engine idling, the windows were cracked. I was trying to cool down when I started noticing something odd. The frogs and crickets all shut up, completely. The only sound left was the truck and the echo from the rocks. I remember looking in the mirror thinking the backup loader must have pulled in behind me, but the road was empty. I heard rocks hitting metal, and not small ones, like someone picked up handfuls of gravel and threw them hard against the dump bed. I killed the truck thinking some kids had wandered down there. I stepped out with a flashlight screaming, "You're gonna get yourselves hurt down here." Nothing. I walked to the back of the truck with the light, shining it on the rock piles. I saw movement on the upper ledge. It was just a flash of something black against the lighter stone. It went down low, then shifted sideways like it was trying to pace me. This thing, I didn't really know what it was or what to think. And it got even worse, because next it stood up straight. Its outline was, well, it had long arms, and I mean too long. It looked almost like something from a cartoon. The shoulders were slumped forward, and when the beam hit its face, its eyes looked like they were lit from below, not from above, like it was leaning down to look at me. I froze up, and it wasn't from fear. It was more like my brain just was struggling to put this thing into a category where it would fit. It dropped down to all fours and came down the ledge faster than anything I've ever seen physically move. I ran for the truck, got in and started it and buried the throttle. In the mirror I could see the light hitting the gravel road. It was upright again. Its chest was heaving, I could see it. It was flashing its teeth like it was snarling, but I didn't hear any sounds. I threw the truck in gear and took off up the road. There was gravel flying everywhere, but I didn't let off until I made it out of there to the highway. The foreman chewed my out the next morning for leaving without the backup loader, but I don't care. I didn't go back there until daylight, and even then, I brought another guy with me, and we were armed. There were all types of drag marks in the gravel along the bottom of the slope, and they were deep ones. It looked to me like it was made by something very strong, very heavy, and had very sharp claws. The guy said it was just runoff from the rain that night, but I know what I saw, damn it. I've been all over these hills all my life. I've had all types of close calls and encounters with dangerous wildlife, but whatever the hell that thing was, it wasn't any of them. Every now and then, when I'm on a late haul and the radio gets quiet, I still start thinking about that night, that thing and what it was, what it wanted, where it came from. I can hear the gravel hitting the metal, the way that thing stood there watching me. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, staring at one of these things, just leave if you can. The mental damage it does by seeing it is bad enough. I don't even want to imagine what the physical damage would be if it got close enough to grab you. Anonymous. Real adventures. I've only told this story to my wife and to my son. The reason I'm writing it down is because I still can't sleep much, especially when the wind shifts a certain way at night. It's been 10 years, but I can still see it like it was yesterday. My name's Gerald. I'm 67 now. I used to work nights as a track inspector for the railroad down near Livingston, Tennessee. The work involved lots of walking, checking for washouts and loose ties. I'd park my truck near the siding and walk the stretch with a light and my tool bag. Most nights it was peaceful. In early November of 2015, I was covering a section that runs along the edge of the river valley. It's quiet down there. Thick woods, steep drop-offs, and no cell signal to speak of. I remember it was cold enough that the gravel crunched under my boot. The air had that sharp, metallic smell it gets before a frost hits. Around 2:30 in the morning, I was about halfway through my section when I heard what I thought was someone walking behind me. I stopped and turned around, and there was no one there. A few minutes later, the same thing. Crunch, crunch. I finally asked if anyone's there. The faint whistle of the wind was the response I got. I told myself it was my boots, an echo off the cut rock, or it maybe could have been an animal up on the bank. I went back to work, trying not to think about it. No big deal. Then I was hit with this smell. It was very strong, wet, and sour. It smelled like dog fur left in the rain mixed with something metallic. It reminded me of blood. It was so thick I could taste it in my mouth. I lifted the light up and started shining it all around. I was beginning to get nervous. I saw something just past the tracks, maybe 20 yards ahead of me. I immediately could tell that I was in a bad spot. It was something tall. It was standing up, but not a man. It was wide across the chest. The legs were bent backwards like a dog's. It had a bushy tail that went straight down and curved up right before it touched the ground. When it turned its head toward the light, the eyes caught it like polished copper. It started moving along the edge of the trees, walking parallel to me. It was stepping over logs like they were not even there. An animal should not be able to walk like a person, especially that gracefully. It didn't make any noise, except for the crunch of leaves. I started making my way away from this thing, but I kept my eyes on it as I was backing away. When it finally stepped onto the tracks, my brain just melted in my skull. I kept trying to label it as anything else. The arms were too long, the head was extremely broad. The way it moved wasn't natural, it wasn't curious or scared, it was watching me the same way a wolf watches something before it decides what to do with it. I started waving my light, shouting, trying to make myself bigger. I didn't know what else to do, and this thing didn't flinch. Instead, it looked amused. It dropped down low, pressing its hands to the rails. It let out a growl that rattled through the steel like a tuning fork. I felt it in my boots. I don't even remember running back to the truck. One minute I was there, facing this down, and the next I was slamming the door and throwing it in reverse. The light rolled across the seat and went out. For a few seconds, the headlights caught it standing in the middle of the tracks. It was just watching me drive away. Then I saw it just step back into the dark. I never mentioned anything to the company. I just said I'd found signs of trespassers and refused to take the section alone again after that. My supervisor didn't try to persuade me otherwise. He said even the locals avoided that stretch after midnight. I found that very curious. I've spent my whole life working outside. I've seen animals, I've dealt with crazy people. I almost got shot one time by someone on drugs, but I never saw anything that could look at a man the way that thing did, like it was deciding whether or not I should end my life there or be allowed to walk away. My life was in the balance, and that thing was the judge, jury, and executioner. If you end up sharing this, and anyone listening now, if you're laughing or doubting, making jokes about what I just typed out, I assure you, I pray that you never experience anything close to what I did. But go ahead. If laughing helps you deal with this and makes it easier for you to sleep at night, then just keep laughing. Gerald R., Livingston, Tennessee.
Hey, Reels. My name's Matt, and this happened in June of 2017 near Baldwin, Michigan, along one of those sandy back roads that cut into the Manistee National Forest. I'm not a big believer in cryptids or anything like that, but my girlfriend at the time was obsessed with all those late-night podcasts about dogman sightings up here. She'd heard about a supposed hotspot off a trail near Wolf Lake and decided it'd be fun for us to camp there one weekend. I told her all this crap was just internet hype. Half the YouTube videos about the area were obviously fake. But we were both off work and needed to get out of town, so I said fine. I figured I'd show her there was nothing to be afraid of. To prove all this was fake and for attention-seeking purposes only, once and for all. We parked at a small pull-off just past where the pavement ends, and you can't miss it. There's a faded green DNR sign and a fire road that drops toward the river. We set up a small dome tent about 100 yards off the trail. We cooked some brats over a propane stove and spent the first few hours joking about all those sightings. Around 10:30 at night, it got dead quiet. I heard no sounds, no frogs, no bugs. The temperature dropped insanely fast. I remember seeing my breath in the flashlight beam, which should not have been the case. We heard what sounded like footsteps in the sand. Not far away either. I would guess no farther than 30 feet. I turned the light towards the sound and caught a glimpse of something. Just a dark shape that quickly shot out of view. She asked me, "Did you see that?"
I tried to laugh it off, said it was probably just some wildlife cutting through the area, something curious of us being there. But the steps didn't sound like any animal, and they didn't come in pairs. There was a rhythm to them like a person walking around. About 10 minutes later, we heard the same crunching sound circle around the tent. Every time I pointed the light, it would stop. When I turned it off, the walking would start up again. I finally said, "That's it. I'm done with this." I unzipped the tent, stepped out barefoot onto the sand, light in one hand and a machete in the other. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I realized what I thought was a fallen log was actually something crouched down at the edge of the clearing. The flashlight caught the shape enough. The curve of a back, two pointed ears, the way it slowly turned its head towards us. Its eyes were a dull orange. They were lower to the ground than you'd expect from something this size, but like I said, I think it was crouched down low trying to stay hidden. My girlfriend whispered my name from inside the tent, and that sound seemed to snap it out of whatever it was doing. It stood up completely, tall enough that the beam hit its chest, then its neck, then the underside of its jaw. I didn't wait. I dropped the light and yelled for her to run. We grabbed what we could and made for the truck. We left everything else behind. When we hit the main road, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the light from the dropped flashlight still glowing in the woods. Something moved past it, blocking it out for a second like a shadow cutting through the beam. We kept going and did not stop until we hit Baldwin. We spent the night in the truck by a gas station. I went back the next morning, and mostly to prove to myself there was nothing out there. The flashlight was nowhere to be found. The tent and the cooler were still there, untouched. I know how this sounds. I've heard all the comments before. I've camped in that forest my whole life. I've seen bears, coyotes. You name it, I've encountered it at one point or another. I even had a run-in, a very close call with a mountain lion once near Wellston. None of them move like this thing did. None of them stand like that either. I still tell myself I don't believe in dogmen, but I know what I saw out there wasn't anything that belongs in those woods. But if I'm being a truthful person, which I feel like this is the best time to do so, I tell myself I don't believe so I don't have to face the reality that these things are real. It's very hard to swallow. Anyway, thank you for your channel, and thank you for letting people like me get these things off of their chest. Much love, brother. Matt, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Reels. I chose to send this in because I've heard you read a few stories from around land between the lakes. I've never heard one quite like what happened to me and my friend Terry back in April of 2018. We both grew up in Murray, about 20 minutes south of the LBL line. We'd been hearing stories about the beast since high school. You know how it goes. Everybody knows somebody who swears they saw something up there, but nobody's got anything to prove it. One Friday night, Terry came by with a couple of cigars and said, "Let's go check out the old service road near Hematite Lake. It's outside the park boundary, so we're not breaking any rules." I figured, why not? We weren't drinking, we were just bored. We drove his Tacoma up past the last house on the county road and parked at the gate marked Maintenance Access. There were tire tracks on the gravel, so it didn't look off limits. We walked about half a mile in with flashlights. Of course, we were both talking complete trash about how people make stuff up for clicks. It was one of those spring nights that feels like summer already. It was humid, the frogs were going crazy, everything was alive. Then, like someone hit a switch, all the sound just got sucked out, even the crickets. Terry noticed it first. He told me to listen. That silence was heavy enough that it made the hair on my arms stand up. I remember trying to play it cool, trying to come up with every rational reason I could, telling myself it was probably a pack of coyotes nearby. But inside I felt that weird pressure in my chest and in my gut, like when someone's watching you. We started hearing something walking around. It was pretty steady movement on the gravel, very clear, you could hear it perfectly. This wasn't imagination, this was something walking. It was coming from the bend ahead of us. I hit my light and saw a flicker of quick movement, and it jolted and ran behind a tree. This thing, whatever it was, when the light hit close to it, it acted like the light was going to catch it on fire. It was something dark. It leaned completely out of view. I remember Terry saying something like, "That was tall." We stood there waiting for someone to call out, maybe a hiker, a trespasser, anything human. But nothing came. Just that silence. Out of nowhere, with no warning or sounds at all, this monstrosity stepped out into view. It was about 35-40 yards up the road, right in the middle of the bend. I had my light hit square on its chest, and the light lit up fur across the shoulders and chest area. It stood upright. It wasn't slouching, it wasn't crawling, it's just standing there like it owned the damn place. Its head was something out of a nightmare. It was absolutely huge. It looked like it was too big for the body. The ears were high, the snout was long and skinny. When it would turn slightly, the light hit its eyes in such a way that they glowed a gold color. I never saw it blink, not once, even when the light was directly in its face. Now, at this moment in time, Terry started backing up and tripped on some gravel. When he did that, the thing flinched, and then it moved. It just stepped off the road and went into the trees. It was like watching a shadow disappear behind a curtain. We tried to be quiet and not speak until we made it back out. Both of us were breathing like horses, and Terry threw the truck in reverse, turned around so fast he nearly backed into a tree. We didn't talk about it much afterward either. You'd think we would have told everyone, but honestly it felt personal, like we'd seen something we weren't supposed to see together, like it was a secret that we should keep. It's a very weird thing to say that, but it's just how I felt. A few weeks later, we went back in the same spot during the day. The road looked normal. You'd never know anything strange happened there. But then we reached the same bend, and I remember Terry saying, "Don't you feel it? Like it's watching us even now." I laughed back then, but between you and me, I haven't been back out there. I still drive around that area, sometimes for work, and every time I pass that specific turnoff, my stomach starts to turn. Whatever's out there, we saw it, and it knew that we weren't supposed to be there, or at least that's how it acted. I think it just wanted to make sure we left the area. I don't know why it claims that area, but it can have it. My portion. I'll give it away. I'll never go back out there. You can say these things aren't dangerous, they're not aggressive. As long as you don't harm them, they won't come after you. You can say all these things until you see one yourself. I bet your mind will change a bit. I can't speak for anyone else, but the thing I saw could tear a human apart in seconds. It was the biggest living, breathing animal I've ever laid my eyes on, walking on this side of heaven, or hell, however you want to look at it. Anyways, Reels, I've went off on a wild tangent here. I'll go ahead and end it because that's all I got. J. Murray, Kentucky. Reels, a big hello from down Texas way. I won't give my name, but I live just north of Houston. What I'm about to tell you happened in October of 2019 in the Sam Houston National Forest. It was near New Waverly. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, just a quick weekend project for a YouTube channel some friends and I were starting called Beyond Belief, Texas. We'd planned to make short videos visiting haunted or cryptid locations. Basically, what we were doing, we were poking fun at them and people that watch them, and see if we could explain what people were actually seeing. We were sort of debunkers, if you will. At the time, the Dogman sightings around the forest were all over Reddit and Facebook groups. There were supposed reports of glowing eyes, howls, even a few people saying they'd seen a wolf walking upright near the Lake Conroe side. I'd been to that forest hundreds of times for camping and hunting. I never saw anything weird, so we decided it would make a perfect episode 1. Before you go looking, there is no episode 1. There were 3 of us, me, and we'll call my 2 buddies, Lewis and Bryce. We packed light, 2 cameras, a GoPro, and a single LED spotlight that ran off a truck battery. That thing was brighter than the sun. The plan was to drive one of the Forest Service roads after dark, film some reactions, and call it a night. Around 9 p.m., we turned off FM 1375 onto a side road that cuts east towards the lake. No traffic, nothing out there. The air was still a bit humid from a storm that had passed earlier in the day. The mist was starting to form over the ditches. We parked where the road split and set up the camera. I remember joking around and laughing, saying, "Cue the ominous music," while Bryce filmed me holding a flashlight. About 10 minutes into filming, we heard something crack off to our right. This wasn't a twig. It sounded like a limb being snapped, like a toothpick. Lewis panned the camera toward it, still laughing. He said, "There's your Dogman, boys." Nothing showed up on the screen, but that's when the forest went completely quiet. Then came this growl. It was deep enough that it rattled my entire body. It is hard to describe this sound. It wasn't loud, it was just low. It was like it was close, but holding back. I remember Bryce saying, "I hope we caught that on audio." Lewis shined the light where the sound came from, but we saw nothing but trees and brush. I told him to sweep it slower. The light stopped on something grayish and standing statue still. It was just inside the tree line. For a second I thought it was a tree trunk, until it turned its head. 2 amber reflections blinked at us from about 6 feet off the ground. My buddy Bryce immediately giggled a bit and said, "Who knew we were coming out here? That's someone in a mask." But his voice did crack about halfway through. You could tell this wasn't a human at all, even in a mask. It took 1 step forward, and the stride was too long for a human. You could see the shape of the head with ears, snout, and a neck that was thicker than its skull. Lewis dropped the light, and it hit the ground face down. Everything went completely black, except for the little red glow from the camera. I could hear Bryce cussing, trying to find the truck keys, and Lewis was breathing heavy like he was about to throw up. I turned to grab the light, and while I was bent over, something moved through the brush. Fast. I caught the flash of movement out of the corner of my eye like something crossed the road behind us. I just yelled, everyone in the truck. We all piled in, slammed the doors, and killed every light. No one spoke a word for about a minute. The only sounds I remember hearing, faintly, was some rainwater dripping off the trees and our own breathing. We started hearing sounds again, and then a thump against the rear quarter panel. Just one big thump, like something smacked it with a large hand. That was it for us, and Bryce started the truck and floored it back toward 1375. The spotlight cable got yanked loose and the wire snapped against the fender as we tore out of there. When we hit the highway, we were completely gone. No one dared to even look back. Back home, I watched the camera footage frame by frame. The growl's there, clear as day. And right before Lewis drops the light, you can see the edge of a shape, but it's not clear enough to be definitive at all. It's just something there. Someone would say it's a tree or something else, maybe an animal, but I know what I saw. I just wish that there was more proof on this footage. It's only visible for half a second before the image goes dark anyway. And as for the growl, yeah, sure, I can send it to you, but you know what people are going to say. They're going to say we were skeptics in the beginning and making jokes. One of us probably faked that, so it's just pointless. You'll just have to take my word for it. If not, then there's not much I can do about that. We argued for a week about whether to try and upload this. In the end, we decided it was best if we didn't. Not because we were scared of ridicule, because none of us could agree on what we saw. Lewis said it was a bear with mange. Bryce swears it had to be a person. And I just say now, I don't know. Needless to say, our YouTube channel idea died the very same night that it started. I do have the SD card somewhere. I think it's locked in a drawer, but I've never watched it again. And before everyone starts screaming and ranting and saying we want to see it, prove it, we want to hear the growl, we want to see the footage, I don't owe anyone anything. I'm just telling you what happened. I still myself don't really know what I believe. All I know is for me to put that footage out, there would be specific locations shown in the video, not to mention our faces and other things I don't want to share with the public, especially involving something like this. To be honest, thinking this is real, seeing it yourself, me personally, I'm more afraid of the agencies than I am the beast. So I think for now, respectfully, I'll keep the card where it is. Maybe one day it'll be necessary to pull it out and go over it again and see what could be useful. Until then, you'll just have to take my word. Or don't. Go out there for yourself. See what you can find. But you better take a gun and a few people with you. My name is Doug. And yes, that's my real name. I've lived in southern Wisconsin most of my life, and I've been hunting the Kettle Moraine area since I was old enough to pull a bowstring. My dad used to call it our church, and I guess that stuck. I'm 51 now, and after what I saw in October of 2020, I can't even think about stepping foot in those woods without wondering if it's going to be my last trip. It was the middle of bow season. It was a calm, overcast day. The air felt thick and carried sound forever. I was hunting a stretch of north of Eagle off an old trail that winds up a ridge line overlooking a swamp flat. This spot was perfect for watching deer move between bedding areas. I parked my truck just after daylight, hiked in with my climber stand, and set up about 20 feet high in a hickory tree. Everything was quiet. It was perfect. Around noon, I hadn't seen a thing except the ever so loving, annoying squirrels that you have to deal with, so I decided to stay through the evening. It was too nice a day to leave early. Around 4:30, I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The woods out there are never silent. There's always a breeze, a crow, something. But it went still, like somebody muted the entire world. That's the moment that I started hearing something that changed my life. Footsteps coming from behind me on the ridge. My first rational thought was this was another hunter. I leaned out and didn't yell, but called out loud enough they could hear me. And I said, "Hey, is someone back there?" I got no answer. But the movement did stop. It started moving again a few seconds after that, and it angled toward my tree. I wish I would have stayed quiet because the first sets of steps it was moving away from me. But once I made my presence known, it made a beeline in my direction. As it got closer, I noticed how heavy the steps were. I stayed still. I had my bow in my lap. Whatever it was stopped a little ways behind me. I turned as slow and as quiet as I could. At first, all I saw were the trees and the underbrush. Then one of those tree trunks that I was staring at, the base of a tree, or so I thought, moved. Now, when you see an animal that you mistake for a tree trunk, that is something that cannot be easily explained away. You can't deny it. It was standing behind a big oak tree, leaning out just enough that I could see one shoulder and part of its head. It had extremely dark brown fur, and it looked very coarse. It was almost black where the shadow hit it. Remember I said I'm between 15 and 20 feet up. I felt like this thing, whatever it was, its arms were so long and skinny. It was so tall. If it would have stood directly under my stand, it could have reached straight up and grabbed the footrest of my stand. And that math just didn't sit right in my head. I stayed still, trying to process all of this. The thing leaned out a little more, and that's when I saw an ear. It was pointed, sitting high on the head. Then that eye was a mix between amber and green. It was catching what little light there was left. It blinked once, and only once. I tried not to make any sounds. I was scared, sure, but mostly just locked in place. The amount of things running through my mind at that moment kind of makes everything a blur. It felt like if I moved, it would know exactly where I was. After what felt like a full minute, it just moved back behind the tree and disappeared down the slope without making a sound. I didn't hear a twig snap, no leaf crunch. I don't know how something that size could move through the woods that quietly, but it did. I waited until it was almost dark before climbing down, and that was the longest half hour of my life. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my release. I didn't see it again, but the next day I went back. I stopped at the same spot and looked at the tree it had stood behind. I had to see exactly how tall this thing was. The lowest branch was easily taller than me. Whatever that thing was, it was huge. It had to be, from the ground to the top of his head, at least 9 or 9.5 feet tall. I've hunted that same ridge for 30 years. I know black bears move through from time to time, but I've never seen a 9-foot-tall black bear, and I've never seen one that has a head that looks like a wolf either. And honestly, a bear can stand and take steps here and there walking upright, but they can't do that for long distances and move around trees and not make a sound. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen a bear with pointed ears. I don't care what anyone says. That wasn't a bear. Now, I saved the craziest part of this encounter for the last. 2 years prior to my encounter, I let one of my close friends hunt in that spot. Took him out there, showed him where to go, told him to hunt there, it was a good spot. I didn't hear from him for about 2 weeks. After I finally got a hold of him, he was shaken up pretty badly. He proceeded to tell me how he saw something strange out there. Something stalked him, something big. Something chased him out of the woods. He told me it was an unsafe area and he didn't know what that was. He thought it was some kind of crazy person out there trying to harm him. He warned me, told me not to go back there. I thought he was crazy. I should have listened. My life would have turned out differently. I wouldn't be here now typing this. I wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night with sweats and nightmares. I wouldn't be scared and worried every time I go hunting now. Ignorance is bliss. But once you realize what's out there, there's no more rest. There's no more ifs or maybe. You know. And that is a fact that is very hard to live with. Thanks. Doug, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Hey, Reels. I live outside of Johnson City, Tennessee. I'm into urban exploration. Old hospitals, schoolhouses, anything forgotten. My name's Cody, by the way. I'm not someone who's chasing ghosts. I don't believe in things like that. I just like places that time quit caring about. In April of 2021, that curiosity took me somewhere I wish I'd left alone. My friend Travis told me about a collapsed fire tower up near Unica Mountain. It's technically in the Cherokee National Forest, but you can get there on a service road if you've got 4-wheel drive. He said a lot of locals call it the hanging tower because the top section is still dangling from the frame after a windstorm a few years ago. Online forums mention hikers hearing howls in the area, seeing strange things. But around here, everything howls, so I didn't much worry about that. I just wanted to see the tower. One of the biggest mistakes of my life. We left about an hour before dark. The road up there's narrow and full of switchbacks. It will make you pray nothing's coming down. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun was just an orange strip through the trees. The tower stood maybe 40 feet tall, rusted half to nothing. The cables were struggling when the wind hit. This thing was bad. It was a safety hazard, really. We parked, killed the lights, and started filming a short walkthrough on Travis's phone. He was trying his best to narrate, saying something like another piece of forgotten Tennessee history, when I noticed how the woods sounded off. It caught my attention quickly. I've spent a lot of time in the woods. It's not unusual for that to happen sometimes. But this was different. This wasn't like a predator close. This was a lot heavier, a lot more dead, if that makes sense. I told him to keep quiet for the audio. That's when we both heard something breathing very heavily. It was deeper and slower, and it was coming from somewhere behind the tree line. We both stopped and looked at each other, and at the same time we both said, "Bear." But why would a bear breathe like that? They usually try to stay hidden. We turned toward the truck, and there was some sort of movement. I don't have a full description, or I can't tell you exactly what it was. It was just movement. I saw something move where there should have been nothing. It was a silhouette. It was something down on all fours at first, like a normal animal. And that's when it started rising up behind a pine. The shape of a head, shoulders, and two long arms braced against the tree. The way it moved didn't look like climbing. It was more like it unfolded itself upright. The base of that pine tree had to be easily over 2 feet across. This thing was sticking out at least a foot on each side of that from behind it. That tells you how big and how wide the shoulders were. Something sticks out in my mind. I remember the sound that metal tower made. One of the hanging cables started ringing, vibrating from the wind or maybe from the movement in the trees. That tone was high and sharp. It cut through everything else. That thing moved again, and I caught the reflection of the eyes from the parking lights on the truck. They were level with the halfway point of the tower. That put them maybe 12 or 13 feet up. Travis told me to get in the truck, but neither of us moved, even after he said that. It felt like if we broke that stare, this thing was going to come after us. As I'm looking at this thing's eyes, I could feel like it could see inside of me, like it knew everything I'd done in the past, everything I was going to do in the future. It's a damn bad feeling I can't really describe. It's like it could look into my soul, my very being. And I will say, after that happened, I haven't felt the same. I feel like it actually done something to me. Anyway, all of a sudden those eyes just blinked out, like it closed its eyes or turned away. We heard something crashing through the woods going away from us. It sounded like someone driving a truck through there. I mean, this thing was ripping trees down as it went. I've never heard anything like that. As soon as we heard that, we both opened the truck doors, and when the dome light came on, it felt like we were standing on a stage with the spotlight on us. He dropped the phone, getting in the truck, and we never went back for it. The drive down was pure switchback and panic. Every curve we thought we'd see that thing behind us or it would cut us off. When we finally hit the main road, we headed back to town as fast as we could. And I'm sure everyone's wondering about the phone. Yes, we went back to get the phone. It was not the next day, but the day after. We found it lying in the mud 10 feet from where he dropped it, where we were parked. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. The last video plays fine up until about the 30-second mark, about when all that happened. There's a faint metallic hum that cuts out all the sound, and the screen kind of glitches like the video itself was damaged. It was the same sound that tower made. After that, the audio just stops. Just dead air until the video cuts off. We haven't been back. People online occasionally still talk about that tower. Some say it finally came down last winter. I don't care if it did. Whatever was standing behind it that night doesn't need a landmark. It already knows where to find us if it wants to. as human beings, what I saw with my own eyes. I don't care what you have. We don't stand a chance against something like that. That is something straight from the pits of hell. A true monster of the woods. Everyone please, carry some protection. Whether it'll help or not, at least you'll have some sort of chance. I know now I carry a firearm every time I go out. I won't leave the house without it. As they say, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Thanks. Cody, Johnson City, Tennessee.
Reels, I've been turning wrenches most of my adult life. Out here in Lyon County, Nevada, there's not much between towns except highway, desert, and a kind of quiet that can play tricks on your ears if you're not used to it. I never paid attention to the local stories, the shadow coyotes, the night watchers, all that talk the older folks pass around. I figured it was heat and isolation, boredom, getting to people's heads. My shop sits right off Highway 50, the old loneliest road in America. It's a tin building with one roll-up door, a gravel parking lot, and a faded Coke machine that actually still works if you kick it a few times. I usually close up by 6 p.m., but last March I stayed late finishing a customer's Ford Ranger. It was close to 9 when I finally shut the compressor off. The place went from roaring loud to absolutely still and nothing. I was coiling the air hose when something slammed hard against the bay door, hard enough to rattle the walls. I thought it had to be a drunk that veered off the road, so I grabbed a flashlight and made my way outside pretty quickly. It was moonless that night, and the flashlight barely cut through the dark at all. I didn't see a car. I didn't see a sign of anyone. It was just very silent, and I could swear it was so quiet I could almost hear my own blood moving through my body. Have you ever put yourself in a serious situation, and as soon as you do, you realize, I probably shouldn't be here, but it's too late, because you're already in that moment? Well, that's what happened to me. I looked over, still puzzled. Took a few steps toward the door. I was planning to look for dents when I heard the sound again. It wasn't a hit. This was a drag, like something heavy sliding, metal against metal from the other side of the door. I remember thinking that that's not possible. I had just been inside. I circled back through the side entrance. Still holding the flashlight, I had picked up a crescent wrench in the other hand. I was hit with a smell that reminded me of wet copper and something like skunk, but worse. It was almost a chemical smell. I saw some greasy smears on the inside of the bay door about shoulder height. They weren't fingerprints, more like the marks you'd see if a dog's paw were the size of a dinner plate and ended with sharp claws. The only thing I could think of that made any logical sense, and as silly as it is, what else could I think? I told myself it was some vandal kids that were using oil or tar. But the closer I started looking, the clearer it got. Whatever made those marks had some strength. The steel door was bent inward near the latch. I stepped back, realizing the sound I'd heard wasn't something hitting it. It was pulling at it. My flashlight picked up movement in the open office doorway behind me. It was a shape shifting from black to darker black. Then a set of amber eyes. The way a coal holds heat after the fire's gone out. That's what they reminded me of. It stepped out just enough into the light that my brain just refused to think at all, and I was unwilling to call it what it was. Now, I'm not sure about Dogman, Skinwalker, I don't know. To me, these things are werewolves. That's as plain as it can get. What else do you call something like this? It was standing on two legs. It was hunched to clear, it had to hunch to clear the frame. Long arms nearly brushing the floor. The fur looked like it was wet or matted, like it had come up out of a ditch, like it had crawled out of some nasty pit. The snout was unmistakable, canine, 100%. But it was too big and it was too long, way too thick. The jaw slightly open, showing these back teeth that just aren't meant for tearing. They're meant for crushing. It started sniffing. My whole body froze. It just quit. It wouldn't move. All I could think was, it's real, over and over. The thing tilted its head the same way a dog does. It was like it could hear me thinking that in my head. The motion it made cracked the neck muscles loud enough that it echoed. After a few seconds, it felt like a lifetime. It turned, brushed the door frame with its shoulder, and was gone before I could even blink. I waited almost a full hour, sitting on the floor, before I worked up the nerve to leave. When I stepped outside, there were weird markings in the gravel. I can't really tell you. They were tracks. I don't really know what to call them. But I will tell you what they look like. It looked like a man's boot heel, but with claw tips pressed at the front. They led toward the desert and just stopped. No drag, no return. It's like it just vanished or it flew away. It makes no sense. I've worked at that shop another 8 months since that. I still can't explain any of the events or any of what I saw. But I will not work past dark altogether. Customers don't even know I won't take after dark drop-offs anymore. Folks around here talk about coyotes standing on hind legs near the old mining road. I just nod and change the subject. I used to think monsters were made up to scare kids out of wandering too far from home, or to keep them to following the rules. Now I know better. Some of them walk the same ground that we do. They just wait for the lights to go out to show themselves. Everyone, please, stay safe when you're out and about. Always carry protection, no matter what it may be. Anything is better than nothing. Anonymous. Hello, Real Adventures. I'm a God-fearing man, and I do not fear many things on this earth. I've been a pastor in Mendocino County, California for over 15 years, driving back and forth through redwood country 3 nights a week between home and the little mission hall we rent out for the evening services. Those roads are narrow, winding, and thick with fog half the year, but I've always felt safe on them. God's world is beautiful, even in the dark. Sadly, that belief changed last February. It was close to 10 p.m. when I locked up the church. My wife had texted me asking if I'd pick up some milk, so I took the back route along Highway 20 toward Willits. I'd done it many times before. I had the radio on, and I rounded a bend and saw something in the headlights kneeling in the drainage ditch. I slowed down, not wanting to hit something or push an animal out in the road that would be struck by another car. It wasn't an animal. Or at least, in my mind, it's not an animal. I'll give you one word. Evil. Whatever you call it, or whatever it is, it stood up. Not quickly. It was standing slowly, as if it was testing or gaining its balance. It rose until its head cleared the hood of my truck. Its eyes caught the headlights and were a bright orange, fiery color. They were reflecting like they belonged to an animal, but fixed on me. The rest of it was lean and tall. It was covered in what looked like mud-dark fur. It had a long snout, muzzle open just enough that I could see teeth glinting. For a second I thought, could this be a bear? That is, until it stepped onto the road, completely upright, full height. Its shoulders were narrow, its hips were wrong. One arm swung low. It had fingers that were tipped with claws that almost scraped the asphalt. It crossed right in front of me, and I'll never be able to get those sounds out of my head. My hands were both locked on the wheel, but I wasn't thinking of taking off. I was praying. I just remember over and over in my head, Lord, deliver me from evil. I kept saying it over and over. The creature stopped mid-step and turned its head and looked at me as if it could hear me. That single motion drained every bit of air from the cab. I couldn't move. After about 5 seconds, it felt longer than that. It lowered itself back into the ditch and was gone into the trees. I just sit there. My faith has been tested before. Illness, loss, doubt, we all know. But never nothing like that. The world I thought I understood suddenly felt bigger and colder and more evil, full of things that don't fit Scripture. For weeks after that, I reread passages about the beasts of the earth and angels who took strange forms. I told no one except my wife. She thinks I saw a bear, and maybe that's a lot easier to believe. I think these creatures are tied or related to the Nephilim, but that's a story for another day. I know what a bear looks like, and I know what I saw that night was listening when I was praying. It shouldn't have understood me. It shouldn't have been able to hear me. But I felt it did. I know it did. I still preach. I still drive that same road twice a week. I keep the cab light on sometimes. I leave the radio off. I like to listen. I like to hear the whispers of the redwoods overhead. Every time I pass through there, I always look at that same spot in that drainage ditch, and I thank God quietly every time that it's empty. If that thing ever comes out and looks at me again, I'm not sure my faith or my heart could take it twice. I pray for everyone hearing this, and I pray that you never see such evil on this earth. God bless you all. Hello, Reels. My name is Lana, and I live about 15 minutes outside of Custer, South Dakota. I've been here my whole life. I love it here. The people mind their business. The Black Hills rise just beyond our back pasture, thick with pine and granite. My husband works construction, and I homeschool our boy, Jesse. He's 9 years old. The thing that happened last fall, I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. And the hardest part for me is to admit that my son tried to warn me weeks before I ever took him seriously. I'll stop here for a brief pause. I've heard it so many times. People that won't listen to their kids when they tell them they saw something strange. or something scared them. This is not a joke. I urge you, if your kid is telling you something, listen. It started with Jesse saying he saw the big dog at night near the trees. I thought maybe a neighbor's dog had gotten loose. Then he started saying the dog stood up. He said it watched him from behind the old windmill in the yard, standing like a person. He said its eyes were bright yellow, and it never blinked. I scolded him a bit for making up stories and told him to stop trying to scare me. He stopped talking about it after that, but I'd noticed him staring out the window after dark, scared to even go outside. I can't express to you the amount of guilt that I feel now. It will never happen again. That's why I urge people, listen to your children. They know more than you think. Anyway, the night everything changed was in mid-October. My husband was away on a job, and it was just me and Jesse. I was folding laundry when I heard him whispering in the living room. I thought he was talking to the dog until I remembered our lab had been put down months before. I stepped out and asked who he was talking to. He said, "He's back, Mama. Don't look outside." And of course I looked, because I was still in the stop telling lies mode. The lights over the back porch had turned on. They were shining across the yard toward the shed. Right on the edge of that light was something I can only describe as a nightmare-given shape. It was crouched with one hand flat on the ground and the other gripping the side of the shed door. The arm was too long. The leg was bent wrong. When it lifted its head, the light caught what looked like a werewolf shape in the dark. This thing looked like it was sopping, dripping wet, like it just came out of the creek, which it could have. The eyes weren't glowing. They were this weird shape, almost human, and they had this awareness behind them that I cannot describe through an email, or words for that matter. It didn't move in our direction. It just stayed low and turned its head slightly. I could see its chest moving, so I know it was a living, breathing thing. It straightened up, tall as a door frame, and took one step back into the dark like it was leaving. I pulled the curtains, locked all the doors, and sat on the floor with Jesse for half the night. He didn't cry. He just kept saying, "Now you know." He kept saying, "I told you." I don't know what I saw. I've quit trying to reason it away. It's not possible. I had the sheriff's office come by the next morning, but they said they didn't see any tracks. There was nothing there. I didn't expect them to, really. I don't think things like that leave behind the kind of evidence people can take photos of. The worst part is how small this house feels now. I used to love the sound of wind moving through the trees out back. Now when it happens, I turn the TV up, or start humming to drown it out. I can't get rid of the feeling that it remembers me looking out that window. It's like I'm connected to it now in some way. Like if it's near, I can feel it. Or at least, I think I can feel it. I hope it's just paranoia or my mind. Every now and then, I'll catch Jesse glancing toward the porch light when it clicks on for no reason. He doesn't say anything about it anymore, and neither do I. But deep down we both know that whatever he saw first, whatever we saw that night, didn't just walk away. It knows where we live, and I think that it lives close by as well. I think that it will be back. I have that weird feeling in my gut. All I can do is protect myself and my son. And wait and see what happens. And yes, my husband is aware we have guns, and we do know how to use them. If anything else ever happens, I will update you here. Thank you, Reels. Lana. Hello, buddy. Now, I'm sure that people that listen to your channel and others, they probably think, man, there's a lot of encounters that happen to truck drivers. Now, let me tell you this. You haven't heard a single percentage of the stories that are out there. A lot of these guys refuse to talk about some of the things they've seen out there. Now, I've been driving a rig since '98, and I've seen just about everything that can end up on a highway. I've actually seen drunks dancing in the road wearing nothing but bathrobes. I mean, if you want to talk crazy stuff, we can have a conversation. Anyway, this email isn't about that. But I can say nothing really surprises or shakes me at all anymore. I've seen the worst of the worst. Or at least I had until that night on US 14 heading east out of Shell, Wyoming. It was September, about 2 in the morning. I was hauling feed grain out toward Gillette. I was running caffeine, country radio, and sheer stubbornness. I don't stop for much at night except coffee or flashing blue lights. But I saw something in my headlights lying across the lane that looked like a ginormous dog, or the biggest coyote on earth. I'm an animal guy, and I don't believe in werewolves. Well, I didn't at the time, so I slowed down. I figured I'd check it, and maybe I could help it, or at least get it off the road. I parked on the shoulder, turned the hazards on, grabbed a flashlight, and started walking up front. The wind out there at night cuts right through you. It's got attitude. I was mumbling something to myself. I'm not sure what it was, but it was probably something not good. The thing twitched as I got close to it. And as I got close to it, I noticed how big it actually was and how weird it looked. When it twitched, I jumped about 3 feet back like a house cat and said something else that I won't repeat here. The beam hit it square, except it wasn't a dog. Not unless they started breeding them 6 feet long with shoulders like a football player. The head lifted slow like it weighed too much, and it looked right at me. The eyes weren't shining from the flashlight, they were lit up from inside the skull. Amber, orange, steady as my hazard lights. Right then and there, in the middle of the road, with my life possibly on the line, my brain started arguing with itself. Part of me said, "It's a bear, it's just messed up." The other part said, "Bears don't have hands, you fool." Because this thing did, and it stood. I saw its claws curl around the edge of the asphalt. It rose on 2 legs. It was hunched, but still tall enough to make my trailer reflectors look low. I remember thinking, I'm about to get murdered by a Disney werewolf in the middle of Wyoming. Humor helps sometimes, right? I backed up real slow, trying not to make sudden moves, and out loud I said, "Hey, big fella, you win, you get the road, I'm just borrowing it." It tilted its head like it understood me. The sound that it made next, it was a low humming sound, almost like it was irritated I'd interrupted dinner. There was something dead in the grass behind it, a deer, I think. It was so mangled I can't really be sure. It turned, hunched back over, and tore into the carcass with a noise like wet towels being ripped. I didn't stick around to critique his table manners. I was in the cab faster than I've ever moved in my life. I nearly stripped third gear getting back on the road. Halfway to Gray Bull, I caught myself laughing, and not the good kind of laugh, the half-crazy kind where your brain's still playing catch-up. I remember thinking, well, I guess I finally met the Wyoming Welcome Committee. Now, I don't talk about this or tell this to many people. I was hesitant to do this for a long time, but you've had a few truckers come forward, and I'm not going to give my name, so what's the harm? Truck stops are full of talkers, and I'm not looking to be one of those guys. But I did go back through that stretch once during the day just to see if maybe it was a bear. Nothing was out of place. I didn't see any tracks, no sign of a bear, no blood, no anything. These days I keep my deliveries daytime only. When I see something lying on the road at night, I give it a wide berth. I figure whatever it is can finish napping in peace. If it needs roadside assistance, it can call AAA like the rest of us. Thanks, bud. Anonymous. Reels. I grew up in northwestern Connecticut, in a town so small it didn't even have a proper main street. Around here you hear old stories about woodsmen and dark walkers. My grandfather used to swear the stone walls that run through the forest were built to keep more than cattle in. He'd laugh when he said it, but his eyes told a different story. I started hunting when I was a teenager, mostly deer, sometimes turkey. I've spent more mornings in those hills than I can count. I know what black bear scat looks like, what bobcats sound like. Nothing surprises me out there. Last November I went out before dawn, parked off a dirt pull-off near Mohawk State Forest. Frost covering everything, air sharp enough to bite your lungs. It was cold as hell. I hiked in about 1.5 miles and set up near an old stone wall that's been crumbling since Washington crossed the Delaware. I was still waiting for daylight when the woods went quiet. Not calm quiet. It's like everything just shut off. It almost, in logical sense, would have had to been some type of predator moving through, maybe a bear. So I just stayed still, sit back and waited to see what walked out. A minute later, I heard footsteps, and it wasn't 4 feet. Padding, but 2, heavy, uneven. It was crunching over leaves, and it was moving slow, but keeping a steady rhythm and pace. I flipped the safety off my rifle just in case. As soon as I did that, the steps came to a stop behind the stone wall. Now this was a good 20 to 30 yards away. I don't understand how something could hear a safety click from that far off. Now this thing, it knew instantly. It knew exactly where I was, and it didn't care. I whispered a soft "hey" loud enough that whatever's there could hear me clearly. I was hoping that I would hear another hunter's voice speak up as they were sneaking through. I didn't hear that. I heard this heavy breathing for a couple seconds, and then it stopped. It was almost like something was excited. I raised my rifle just enough to look over the top of that wall. Something tall was standing between 2 trees, I'd say 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was covered head to toe in dark brown, slick fur. It looked thick, but it wasn't shaggy. It had a long, wolf-like snout, pointed ears like a shepherd, and its hands were braced against the tree like it was leaning, watching me. The legs weren't right. They were too long below the knee and bent the wrong way. I don't really remember any color to the eyes or anything glowing, but I do remember they were huge, and they were looking at me. That's all I can remember about the eyes. My first thought was not fear. It was frustration. My brain told me that's impossible, that's not real. I blinked, looked again, and it had shifted behind another tree like it didn't want full view. I could hear it scraping its claws against the bark. That's when the adrenaline kicked in, hard enough to make my teeth hurt. I didn't shoot. I couldn't. Something about it told me that would be a huge mistake. It didn't move much, or it didn't back off. In the beginning, it just waited. After a few seconds, a crow screamed from somewhere overhead, and the sound broke whatever spell we were both under. It turned and ran downhill on two legs. I remember seeing those long arms swinging. It was so fast that I could barely keep up with its movements. I didn't think, I just packed up. I was half stumbling back to the truck, and by the time I made it to the road, the sun was high enough that I almost felt silly. Like maybe I'd just let the dark scare me and I was seeing things that wasn't real. But the feeling in my gut never faded, and it still hasn't to this day. These days I stick to fishing. My buddies tease me, say I'm going soft. I just tell them the woods got too crowded for me. I never told them what really happened and what I really saw out there, because I know what they'd say. I know what I would say if one of them told me that story. It's the same thing I used to say, actually, when I'd hear the old folks talk about those dark walkers in the forest, as they called them. You've been out there too long. Maybe. But not long enough to forget the sound of a dogman breathing. It's something you won't forget. Anton. I'm not going to give a whole lot of information here. You'll understand once I get into it. I've been with the fire department here in Lincoln County, Oregon, for quite a few years. We handle everything from brush fires to car wrecks to the occasional lost hiker. People think it's all adrenaline and being a hero, but truth is, most of the time it's a buttload of paperwork and even more boredom. You do it because you care about your neighbors, not because you expect to see anything out of a movie. One night last March, we got a dispatch call that came in around 11:40 p.m. A woman outside Waldport reported hearing screams near her property line, said it might be a car wreck down in the timber. The sheriff's unit was tied up, so they asked if we could check it. I was lead that night, so I took the rescue truck with one other guy. A rookie, we'll call him Ben. We drove about 5 miles up the old road, and it dead-ended near a stand of spruce and alder. No lights, no sound, except the ocean wind. We called out, thinking maybe someone had fallen. Then, as clear as day, we both heard a noise from down the slope. Not a human scream, but long and low, raising at the end like it came out of a chest, too big to actually exist. I remember Ben asking, "Is that an elk?" I said, "If it's an elk, buddy, it needs an exorcism." We hiked down with flashlights, careful on the wet ground. About 50, 60 yards in, I found a shredded backpack, caught on a stump. The straps were torn. Luckily, I didn't see any blood. There was no ID. We radioed it in, and while we were waiting, something started moving in the trees ahead of us. It was moving slowly at first and started speeding up, getting faster, circling us. You can tell when something's on 4 legs by how it sounds. This was not. It had rhythm. Step, step, pause. Step, step, pause. Like it was pacing us. I even called out at one point, "Search and rescue. Call out." And the reply came. Not an echo. Not a person. It repeated the rhythm of my voice, just lower, like it was trying to copy me. That's when the air felt really heavy. I could feel Ben inch closer behind me. I could see his flashlight shaking across the trees. Something was standing just inside the fog, and it was tall enough that I could only see the outline of shoulders and a head with ears pointed up. The light hit its face, and that 1 second that it lasted was 1 second too long. It had eyes like hot coals, buried in ash, dull red, not glowing bright, but alive. The skin around the snout looked pulled tight, and the fur was soaked like it had come straight out of the river. Its breath was coming out in plumes, but there was no sound. I didn't hear any growling. I didn't have to. Everything in me knew that if I moved wrong, we were both dead. I told Ben. I whispered, actually, for him to back up slowly. We made it 10 feet before the thing stepped forward in our direction. But that one stride took it halfway into the light. The claws on this thing's hands, I don't even want to attempt to type it out or guess how big they were. Just know that they were big enough to rip into a human and possibly tear them in pieces. For whatever reason, it stopped and just stood there, breathing. I don't know if it lost interest or if it decided to let us go, but it never chased us. We got to the truck and took off. The sheriff's deputy showed up an hour later and said they didn't find anything. Nothing, no missing person. We filed our report as unconfirmed animal sighting, and that's as far as it went. I don't know whatever happened with the backpack we found, but nothing ever came of it, and there was nothing in it to ID anyone, and there was no missing persons report, so we just assumed someone lost it or the wildlife had dragged it off into the forest. Now, I've fought wildfires that burned half the ridge. I've pulled people out of twisted cars that didn't look like anyone could have survived. I've carried a body out of a house that didn't make it through the night. But nothing I've ever done compares to looking into those eyes and realizing there's something out there that doesn't fit in our world. Before that night, if you'd told me monsters were real, I would have called you a nut job and probably laughed. I'm a man of reason and training, not campfire stories. But now every time I hear the siren go off and grab my gear, there's a part deep inside of me that wonders what's waiting out there this time, and whether the next call will remind me all over again that I've already met one of these things. They are out there, and they don't care if you believe in them or not. Keep that in mind when you're out in the woods. Anonymous.